I know we all want a finished product right now. I do. You do. Fans do. We all do. But I think as he continues to progress in his young career, us adding competition, I think will help up everybody's game.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think competition's great for everybody. Anytime you got competition at any position, whether it's the quarterback position or wherever it may be, I think that makes everybody better.
Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen, general manager, head coach of the Colts, respectively. That was yesterday here at the NFL Combine. And it is the buzz, it is the topic of conversation when it comes to the Colts, and certainly when it comes to the city of Indianapolis today here in Combine. Day number 2 for our coverage live from the Convention Center. And Shane Steichen going to join the program coming up in the 2 o'clock hour. And there certainly is a lot to unpack from what they said yesterday and then what Chris Ballard said this morning that we will get into as we continue our coverage here from the Combine. Good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison is here as well. We have a host of engineers and those that are on site helping us out here at the NFL Combine. And the topic for sure, you driving in, a little bit rainy, a little bit overcast today, but there is, and it's not a cloud by any stretch, but there is hanging over Hall J here at the Indiana Convention Center when it comes to the Colts contingency of this Combine. And the reality is that when it comes to the totality of the Combine, the Colts are not really a big topic of conversation, because that's what happens when you are just kind of stuck in that middle vat, right? You're not one of those that teams are looking at as a top draft pick, who you're going to take 1, 2, or 3. We've seen that in the past. Anthony Richardson being taken 4th overall, and that was a big topic of conversation. What quarterback would the Colts get that year? Would they move up, or would they stay where they are? And then you have other years where you're Kansas City or you're Philadelphia, and you could see yesterday I saw Nick Sirianni walking around, and you could see this aura around it, because that is the pinnacle, that is the place that every franchise is where they're trying to get. And when you're drafting 14th, and when you are a couple of games away from making the playoffs, you kind of fall into NFL anonymity to an extent. Not always a bad thing, but when you are obviously the host city, there is a lot of focus from a media standpoint on what is said and what is analyzed, and that's exactly where we are right now. So let's begin with that yesterday and that talking point. Competition at the quarterback position. This is what's interesting, and I'm going to go back a couple of years ago. I can recall a couple of years ago when I was on the morning show with Kevin and Mark, and we had Chris Ballard on. I don't recall exactly what point in the season it was. I don't remember if it was like halfway through the season or the preseason, but we had Chris Ballard on, and I recall asking him, in terms of building an NFL roster, what area is the white whale? What's the area that keeps you awake at night? And he did talk about, by the way, Chris Ballard, and I could relate to him in this regard, when he was on this morning, and we'll play for you a lot of that audio over the course of today. But when Chris Ballard was on this morning, he talked about with the guys this morning how at night he has difficulty shutting off his brain. Now, Eddie Garrison knows all too well that I have that same issue, because he never knows when all of a sudden I'm just going to drop in something that I thought of at 2:38 in the morning.
You got that right.
But you know the brain droppings all too well, right, Eduardo? So I can relate to that. But I recall asking Chris Ballard at that time, and this would have been about halfway through the halfway point of where his tenure is now as a general manager. What's the toughest area in building a National Football League roster? And I remember him saying probably depth. Finding depth at positions, and in particular on the offensive line and the defensive line in the areas where you need depth, those are challenges. And that's hard for everybody. I mean, I understand that. That some GMs may say that wide receiver, oh man, it's as long as you have a great quarterback, that makes great receivers. Brandon Stokely was made to look like he was a good receiver. I'm not taking anything away from Brandon Stokely. But there are a lot of guys, Troy Walters and Brandon Stokely, they were great receivers because Peyton Manning put the ball exactly where it needed to be. Andrew Luck did the same for guys. When you have a great quarterback, it certainly helps in lifting your receiver room. So maybe some GMs would say receiver's an easy position so long as you got a great quarterback. Or, hey, secondary's easy so long as you've got great pass rush. But when he talked about building depth, what Chris Ballard was saying at that time turned out to be a bit of a forecast, turned out to be clairvoyant, if you will, towards the 2025 Combine. Because the talking point now is about having competition at each and every position. And competition at each and every position means that you would have depth. And that area that Chris Ballard, by his own admission earlier in his time as a general manager, talking about being his white whale that he couldn't necessarily completely get the feel for. Seemingly, that still eludes him today in terms of a full grasp on, by his own admission. I'm not downing him for that. I'm saying we all have that one area within our job or work that's out of our comfort zone. And I think Chris Ballard knows that he erred a year ago in not having enough depth to push your starters. And so guys came in thinking, I'm good. I mean, yeah, like it's unfortunate to see the battle at that other position or somebody getting cut or somebody, but I'm good. I'm good where I am. And we knew going into the Combine that was a talking point, that was a focal point, that was something that they knew they needed to repair. What we didn't expect that happened yesterday was Chris Ballard coming out and saying, we are going to create competition at every position, including at the quarterback position. And that doesn't mean that we're just going to go out and get a guy like a Gardner Minshew or like a Joe Flacco who's towards the end of their career or who has a pretty defined ceiling just to tutor along Anthony Richardson. For the very first time yesterday, and I do believe this, for the very first time yesterday, one thing you can say about Chris Ballard, more often than not, when you go back and you look at his quotes after the fact, especially going into the draft, if you look at his draft history, a lot of times going into the draft, we sit here and overanalyze 150 different ways the things that he says, and then after the fact, we all sit around and say, you know, he was pretty transparent. He was pretty open about where they were possibly going to go in the draft. And I think for the first time what we are seeing is that we're going to look back and say, Chris Ballard told us at the Combine that Anthony Richardson was in serious jeopardy of them turning the page. And I know that is taking hyperbole here, and that is taking the bait perhaps, and it's easy to say, yeah, man, you're being a talking head, Jake, by just taking a little something and running with it. But if you really look historically at the way he has addressed things and then afterwards been able to say, I pretty much laid that out for you. To me, in contrast to a year ago, what I'm hearing for the first time is a general manager who absolutely sounds not – I'm not going to say so far as to definitively say that they've just flipped the page, but they are absolutely no longer married to the notion of this is the guy, he is our guy, come hell or high water. A year ago, going into the season, because he was coming off injury, I told you, Kevin told you, every one of us, right? J&V told you, Stephen Holder told you that the year was all about the development of Anthony Richardson, that's what it came down to. Last season was about the development of Anthony Richardson. It was about putting Anthony Richardson in every position where he could go out and Anthony Richardson could learn to be the quarterback of the NFL that was the long term, and they wanted to see what they had in Anthony Richardson. And when you start saying things, as Chris Ballard did, like, look, he hasn't proven to be able to, and I'm paraphrasing, to stay healthy for the full year. We have to be able to prepare for the fact that he's not going to be available all the time. I want to play for you, first off, one of the questions that this morning with James Boyd, Jeff Rickard, and Kevin Bowen when Chris Ballard was on. This is not yesterday when he was at the podium. This is today when he was speaking to those guys. He talked about a number of different things. And one of them was the challenges in starting from scratch with a young quarterback that you are developing in Anthony Richardson. But he said something here, and he kind of shifted it into talking about the defense, if I'm not mistaken. But I want you to listen to what he said in the very beginning of this particular clip. This is Chris Ballard from earlier this morning.
Well, look, we drafted a young quarterback. I think we all know it starts right there. So we knew there was going to be some bumps. And anytime you take a young quarterback that hadn't really played a lot of football, you're taking a risk. So there definitely can be questions asked. Did we make the right move? Not in terms of drafting him, but did we, putting him out there to play so soon? Okay, so you got to learn to analyze everything you're doing as you go along the way. And then once you get that position humming, well, a lot of things will fall into place. I think we've played pretty good up front. Not the sack production on the defensive front that we had a year ago, but I think we've done pretty good up front. I think at the skill position, we have, especially at wideout, I think we finally got to a place where we've got our own guys, so young players. They're all ascending. I think that's a good thing. I think the biggest area I think we all know is the secondary. That's the one where we got to do some more work. We got to get some more playmakers, guys that can really make a difference, in the back end. Not easy to find. Not always, sometimes you're subject to what's available. And you got to get, here's the market and here's what's available. Not only in the draft, but also in free agency and also in, guys that get released. So a lot to work with, in terms of the back end. But I do think we have some pieces that, are young and still ascending.
Okay, here's what's interesting to me about that. Number one, he says, we knew there were going to be bumps, right? He says that. And then when he says that, he later said, once you get that position humming, talking about the quarterback, to me, you don't necessarily point out retroactively, that you knew there were going to be challenges unless you have now come to the conclusion that those challenges may always be there. We knew going into it there were going to be bumps. But then he says, once you get that position humming. So he's not saying, look, the position's humming now, which is good because we knew there were going to be bumps, but it's humming now. He is essentially saying, we know that those bumps are still there and none of them have been ironed out. None of them. And when he talks about the defensive backfield and the corners in that area, that's one of them that a year ago, again, Chris Ballard sat during the combine and his narrative about the corners and about the defensive backfield 1 year ago was, I got to see these guys play. You guys can sit here and tell me till the cows come home that we don't have players here. I don't know that until I've seen them play. Now a year later, after he's seen a lot of those guys play, he is saying we need to go out and get more corners. So it sounds to me like there are two different areas where if you look at it and you look consistently at the way he delivers message, it sounds to me like Chris Ballard is starting to prepare us for the fact that the Colts have accepted that Anthony Richardson is not the guy. And he is a boatload of talent, and he is unique. He's a unicorn as Anthony Richardson. I understand all of that. But for an organization that has, from the get-go, made it very clear to us that Anthony Richardson is somebody that, listen, we want to go out there. This guy has a ton of talent. We believe in him. We stand by him. I'm not saying that they don't like the kid. I'm not saying that they don't want to stand by him. But I think for the first time they are essentially starting to say the door is open on the possibility that we're going to move on and we've seen enough. Now, not to say that they're going to release the guy, but that we've seen enough where we now know that this is something that we cannot, in good faith, feel like reliably that we can go for, right? I just, that was the first thing, when I heard that was the first thing that I thought as I was listening to it was, and the same with yesterday, right? Now, the other question becomes, and James Boyd's going to join us just a couple of minutes from now, and he asked a very good question about this. So let's say hypothetically that the Colts are going to open this up for a quarterback competition. Eddie Garrison, I will ask you. I'm going to ask you off the top of your head, not who you want, not who you think, but just throw me a name of a quarterback that seemingly would be a realistic free agent signing or maybe a late round draft pick trade to acquire. Give me a quarterback that realistically you could see coming in being one of those that's competing for the quarterback position.
Daniel Jones.
Daniel Jones. Okay. Now, Daniel Jones knows this. Excellent, excellent name to throw out for this equation. So Daniel Jones knows. The Colts call Daniel Jones, and they say, Daniel Jones, Chris Ballard, how you doing? Good, good. You good? I'm good. Yeah, good. Okay. Listen, I know that your time in New York has come to an end. I know that you were given a lot of opportunity there. We would be interested in bringing you into Indianapolis to compete with Anthony Richardson. Daniel Jones is going to think to himself, look, I was a single-digit draft pick. If I'm not mistaken, I'd have to look. I think, Eddie, where was he drafted, like 8th overall? I could be wrong in that, but he was a high draft pick, Daniel Jones. He was a first-round draft pick. So Daniel Jones is going to look at it and say, I know how much time and how many games I got and how all of the chances I got as the starting quarterback of the New York Giants because of where I was acquired. And this guy is the number 4 pick in the draft, not 10 years ago, right? He's played fewer than 20 games in the NFL, and he was the 4th overall draft pick. Why in the world would I go to Indianapolis and they can tell me I'm competing, but am I really? Because I believe that whoever comes in is window dressing because they're going to keep handing the keys to Anthony Richardson because he was the 4th overall pick. And James Boyd brought that up to Chris Ballard of how do you sell a quarterback that it's a legitimate competition as opposed to a window dressing title of competition, knowing that you want to continue to invest in Anthony Richardson and give it every single look and overturn every single rock to make sure that you're looking for every single hint of who and what he can be. I thought it was an excellent question, and Chris Ballard answered it by saying this.
I think it depends on, who it is. And look, it was, and there's a lot of guys that, that in this league that have had rebound careers who have done great things. I even look at the year we had Gardner, that we did a lot of good things that year. And look, we come down to about 2 or 3 plays at the end. That cost us winning the division and going to the playoffs. So you never know where that guy's going to come from. And, there's free agency, there's the draft, there's a lot of avenues. You just never know. I mean, I'm sure Frisco didn't exactly 100% know they were getting with the last pick of the draft, Brock Purdy. So you just never know where that guy comes from.
Okay. 2 things there. Number 1, Gardner Minshew. Let's look at the year that Gardner Minshew was here, Chris Ballard says, and what he did. And yes, Anthony Richardson got hurt, and so Gardner Minshew has to play. If Gardner Minshew is the example you're giving, then why was Gardner Minshew not on the roster for year 2? Why don't you go ahead and retain him, bring him back? I understand why they didn't, and I understand that Gardner Minshew also is one that was like, look, I'm going to go somewhere where I can start, and he was able to do that and go out and get some money. I get that. But in that situation, if you are now going back and basically reverse it, and this is what this franchise, where they have been cursed a little bit, is oftentimes they're going back and having to reset the table to redo or make good on what they had done previously. So in other words, you had that situation seemingly before you, and then you decided, and I understand why, because it's the 4th overall pick. So you go with Anthony Richardson because you want to make sure, because Richardson is, in fact, you haven't had the chance to give him a good look because of the injury standpoint, but now you're back to square one. Now, notice also that he mentions Mr. Irrelevant in Brock Purdy. Does that mean that they are exploring or examining the possibility, should one be there, of a late draft pick? Could that competition actually come from a rookie? Hard to think that, but you can't rule it out, that a rookie would be somebody that you draft to, again, create that competition. But all of it, again, comes down to, it sounds to me like for the very first time, they are opening the door to the possibility that they are going to turn the page. Now, I thought the most telling part of Chris Ballard this morning was when Kevin Bowen asked him, what has been the highlight of his tenure as the general manager now? This is Combine number 9. Sometimes you can always tell. We've all been in that situation where, like, you're trying to state your case for something, or you're trying to discuss something, and somebody asks you a question, and you have to stop and think because you're like, oh, wait a minute. That's a tricky one. And it sounds like that happened. Listen closely, in particular, to the way he begins to answer the question from Kevin Bowen. And that question to Chris Ballard, what has been the highlight of your time as a general manager?
2018 was really fun. And I wouldn't say a greatest achievement because it's never just me. Like, there's a bunch of people to win. It takes everybody. There's like I'll get a lot of the credit when we have success, and I'll get a lot of the blame which I deserve whenever we don't. But it takes a lot of people to have success. But watching Andrew come back from what he came back from, watching that team come back from 1-5, that was a cool experience. I mean, it really was. That was one of the coolest experiences in my career. And then building it where we were at. I mean, and with all those young, you remember how young we were. Yeah, I mean,
Leonard was huge.
We were young. You had Braden, you had Quentin, you had Leonard, we were really, really young. So that would be one. Two, 2020 season is both a high and a low because I really thought we could, we lose that tough game in Buffalo. But bouncing back from 19, I thought those two seasons really stick with me. And then, and even in these hard years, we've had some cool moments that I really enjoyed. Like in 21, going to Buffalo and doing what we did to Buffalo, that was, and Frisco that year. We went to Buffalo and Frisco that year and New England at home. If you remember the end of that game when Jonathan broke it, and the sound of the crowd and the excitement, there's been some other cool game moments, but 18 and 20 were really, those were neat seasons. And in 20 especially just because of COVID. If you remember what we went, we almost forget how hard that was on everybody, y'all, us,
so
players.
Weird, yeah.
And to be able to do that in very tough circumstances when other teams didn't, it was a credit to the organization.
Again, I thought it was very telling. He's not wrong. It was a lot of fun. Look, there have been good times for sure. But Chris Ballard knows. Chris Ballard knows what the expectation has been. Chris Ballard, I think, also knows that, truthfully, and I think you have to look at this in reality. I think Chris Ballard also probably knows that a big part of why he is still the general manager is twofold. Number one, because Jim Irsay believes in him, and they have a working relationship that clearly is positive. And then number two, Jim Irsay, as we know, and it's well documented, has in the last year or so had, just from a health standpoint, the initiatives or the priorities of his own health over necessarily, kind of pulling back a little bit on the day-to-day of the football franchise. And in that capacity, he put somebody in that he trusts to be able to run his franchise and is going to continue to run the franchise. And when you do that, and when you're having somebody else that is carrying the torch for you in your absence, you want to make sure that you are doing so with an individual that you work well with and that you feel like is an extension of you. And I think that they have that, whether fans agree with it or not, whether fans like it or not. I think that Jim Irsay feels that way in the moment right now about Chris Ballard more so than others. And maybe Chris Ballard himself may be part of why since 2018, that's a long time ago. In football terms, it's like dog years. In football terms, that's like dog years. That's like 50 years ago, right? But Chris Ballard, since then, has not really had competition. He's not really had in the back of his mind the thought of somebody pushing him. He's felt safe in his position. And now for the first time, he's seeing what happens when that actually is the case for his players, which maybe opened up his eyes to a lot of things. One of those being, is it possible that Anthony Richardson is getting the message now that, in fact, he is no longer the certain starting quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts? Big topic today at the Combine. James Boyd will join us. We'll talk about that. Got a big show lined up for you today, as a matter of fact. Lance Zierlein from the NFL Network is going to join us coming up 1 o'clock. We'll get an idea as to this Combine from the national standpoint, where are areas of depth, what, kind of an analysis of the draft itself. And then again, Shane Steichen, 2 o'clock hour. So a lot to unpack here on this day number 2 of our coverage from the Combine 2025. You're listening to it on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Topic. Anthony Richardson, is he, I'm not going to say done. I mean, that's obviously way too extreme. But like I've said, to summarize it, if you're bringing in a quarterback competition, you do not have a definitive quarterback. Joining us now at the Combine, James Boyd, who you hear in the mornings now, of course, with The Athletic, and also now a member of the morning show here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. He was part of the panel this morning that talked to Chris Ballard live on our radio station. That podcast is available. We ask that you wait until at least 6:30 tonight to listen to it. But the podcast is available in its entirety at 1075thefan.com. James, we'll begin with this. Your overall takeaway. And sometimes, to be honest with you, you can tell, and maybe it's our job to relay this to people, when you are talking to or doing an interview live with somebody, you get a better feel because you can kind of see their body language, their eyes, the way that they're answering questions. Your overall takeaway, given all of those factors on your conversation with Chris Ballard?
I thought he more or less doubled down on what he said yesterday this morning, where with Anthony, he wants it to be a real competition. But my thing is, how real can it really be? And he wouldn't budge on that. You know, I guess we'll have to wait and see who they eventually bring in. But I think he was what we've always seen. He was, pretty honest about his assessment in himself, his failures, beat himself up a little bit, said he feels like the city is kind of, feels the weight of him not succeeding, can't sleep at night because of it, all those things. But, at the end of the day, it's like, we're not here for a sob story. What are you going to do to fix it? And so I think it starts with, at least in my mind, trying to push those buttons, because I don't know if this is a real competition, Jake. However, I do think that just putting it out there, they're hoping that they light a fire underneath Anthony Richardson's butt.
Or could it be, James, that they're hoping that they light a fire under whoever it is they're going after? Because to your point, if you are, like I just mentioned Eddie mentioned Daniel Jones, okay? If you're Daniel Jones, you're looking at it and saying to yourself, I know how many opportunities I got in New York because of where I was selected, because of how I was acquired. I've always felt, James, that a big part of the judgment of a player or the patience of a player is determined upon your investment in it, right?
Right.
So any player knows, look, this guy's a top 4 pick recently. They're not going to just give up on that right away. And so I think quarterbacks are going to be skeptical of coming here because they're going to feel like what you just said, that this is window dressing.
Yes.
Which leads me to believe, I do think this. The one thing, and I want your reaction to this thought, the one thing about Chris Ballard we can say is that more often than not, we look back at things that he said and say, we overanalyzed that, but he was pretty transparent. In this situation, it is my belief that they are opening the door for the very first time to then be able to say that they had told us on the fact that they were ready to turn the page.
I don't hate that theory. I don't hate it. But to me, I don't even know if you can kind of let that, is it doubt in? Because you picked him. This was the highest drafted quarterback since Andrew Luck for this franchise. And so if you're already kind of halfway in, halfway out, going into his third season, doesn't that mean you're already out?
But here's the thing, James. This is the best way I would say it. When you went to college, okay, let's just say that
long time ago, by the way.
Right. Well, tell me about it. So when you went to college, if you knew going into it that when you brought your first report card home and your grades were, you got a 2.5 and your parents expected a 3.5. Okay. That's when you would say, look, you knew going into it that it was going to be a challenge for me because I was going away from home and this was different than high school. Because you are having to explain and brace them for the fact that you have fallen short of what you knew was supposed to happen. When he says now, look, we knew there were going to be bumps in the road in drafting Anthony Richardson. We knew that. To me, that is his way of saying, look, we knew that because now we are telling you, we're reminding you of that because we do, in fact, feel like this has fallen short of where it was supposed to be. And that they already have concluded, not in totality, I'm not saying they're ripping the page off because that probably is determined upon who you can get in. But it just feels to me like a year from now we're going to say, a year ago they basically told us Anthony Richardson experiment was coming to an end, and now we know it was.
I do think there's an element of self-preservation that everyone always kind of thinks about. But to me, at that point,
why else say it, though? Why else say?
I think because you want to push Anthony. I think that's the biggest thing. And maybe that is concerning. Maybe it is concerning that you want to sort of drive his, I don't know, his mentality up or his professionalism, whatever the case may be.
So, James, if this combine is all about getting to know players, and if this combine is all about interviewing players and scrutinizing players and getting them down to the underwear Olympics and knowing every single aspect of the player themselves, how possibly could they have had a top 4 pick in the NFL draft for quarterback, the most important position in professional sports, and selected a guy that they didn't know 2 years later they were going to have all kinds of dog whistles to try to motivate?
I mean, that's the damning part about this. I felt like this when he got benched, and I used it in the story yesterday, actually. You go back and talk to Ballard at the end of the season, hey, why did it take benching him to get his attention? And he compares it to, you ask kids to clean your room, and they don't do it. I mean, what are we doing here? So I don't know. At this point, I feel like you kind of made your bed. You're in it. And you shouldn't, at least in my opinion, try to find the exit route as soon as possible versus trying to find every possible pathway forward to succeed. Now, what that looks like, I think a lot of it is kind of getting him to understand. And I think Ballard said yesterday actually, I think he understands the enormity, he used that word, enormity of being the face of the franchise.
Do you believe that going into this combine, the Colts are looking at a roster and looking at positions that they feel are going to better lift Anthony Richardson, or are they looking at building a roster that is going to be one that can somewhat be self-reliant regardless of quarterback play, if that makes sense of the difference?
I see what you're saying. I think the former comes first. I think you have to do whatever you can to make Anthony work. Because I've said this over and over again on our airwaves, other places. If they somehow find a way to help Anthony make a Josh Allen type of leap in year 3 where he goes from, man, this guy isn't accurate at all, to, wow, he's actually pretty, successful as a passer, that to me matters more than anything else. Like if your defense is terrible, but Anthony Richardson figured it out, I think everything else is kind of forgivable.
Here's the thing. Josh Allen in college had seasons of a completion percentage that showed that it was there. You had reason to believe it was there, okay? When you talk to people that see Anthony Richardson yesterday, yesterday I had on J.P. Shadrick, who does Florida football. He works for the Jaguars, and he said, yeah, the thing at Florida is he never showed any consistency in completing a pass. So there's not the groundwork. I believe in his athleticism, and there are times where, and I get it, James, I totally understand why they are so intrigued by it. Because you look at it, and
if they hit, it's like,
I know, man. It's like I've always said, we all have that one, like everybody had that one person in college, that one girl that was so hot, she actually answered the phone every 10 times you called and followed through on every 3 times that you made plans, but you kept calling her because you were so captivated by it, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it is. Now, having said all of that, this particular draft, what are the – look, tight end we know, right? And now we're talking about, corners and defensive backs, and that's an area that a year ago Chris Ballard said, I've got guys, I need to see him play. I need to see him play. He mentioned to you guys this morning that's an area that is still of need. So does that mean that he saw them play and he knows that he needs better players?
I think so. And even if you feel like the players that you played, whether it's Samuel Womack or Jalen Jones, took a step forward, you can't bank on that because, to me, the only proven, sustained success you've seen at cornerback on this current roster is Kenny Moore. And so you don't want to be in a situation where maybe perhaps it was fool's gold, not to discredit those guys for playing decent football, but who's to say Jalen Jones will take another step up? I just don't understand how, to me, how you really go towards banking on 1 year of production.
I like Jalen Jones, by the way. I thought he showed. And Juju, I like Juju Brents, but again, Juju Brents is like the defensive backfield Anthony Richardson.
Yeah,
you can see it there, but it's a matter of staying healthy.
Ideally,
right?
I think you would draft someone and probably pick up someone in free agency. And at the very least, it's like, okay, even if our guys are Samuel Womack, even if it is Juju Brents, he's healthy, or Jalen Jones, we have some depth just in case, because we've seen, every time you don't have depth, you can never have enough of it. Somebody gets banged up, and we were like, we told you to get some cornerbacks, and you didn't do that.
James Boyd will continue the conversation with us, including what is the big story. And by the way, Pacers in action tonight taking on the Raptors. James' other past life where he was an NBA
yes,
writer.
sir.
Let's not forget about that. We'll get into that today as well. But when we come back, what other storylines involving the Colts may be murmured throughout the Combine that don't involve the quarterback position? We'll ask that next. Here we are, Combine. It is actually today seems a little more subdued than yesterday. Now, just to give a recap for everybody, we are at the convention center, and we're kind of in the corner. Like if you were looking at Lucas Oil Stadium, looking down in the football field, we're in the bottom right corner of the end zone, and then there are tables set up all along the football field, and the majority of them, I would say, I think there are 55 total tables. All of the teams are represented with their own independent, media team. And there are a couple of television stations, but for the most part, it is radio stations. Yep. I did notice again yesterday, and this is a tradition, when I was leaving here, so keep in mind it was probably 4:15 by the time I left. Mm-hmm. I went through the Hyatt to get back to our building, and there's a Starbucks in the Hyatt, and I did see the kids from the Raiders lined up to get coffee at 4 in the afternoon. I think they'd just gotten out of bed. The Raiders social media team, I think they're Tiki Bob's regulars. But everybody else, you're here in the morning. It's probably fairly quiet. The Browns, like last year, we had, I think it was the Vikings next to us, and they were gone after day 2. I think the Browns folks might have left. I can't tell. The Cleveland radio folks.
Oh, no, there's a coffee cup there, remnants of other things.
Chicago is still here. Chicago's used to having a lot to talk about at the Combine, obviously. But James Boyd here as well. In terms of just kind of to me, it feels like because this is not a draft that has definitive quarterback battle up front, that takes away a little bit from the oomph factor of the Combine. The biggest storyline at this Combine, non-Colts related, would be what?
What happens with Matthew Stafford in L.A., the Rams? I know it's the Combine, but this is like the breeding grounds for trade conversations.
He's kind of the key domino, right?
Yeah, I think wherever he kind of goes will determine the rest of the offseason. And also Myles Garrett. We had their team general manager come out yesterday with Andrew Berry and kind of stick to his guns of, hey, we don't want to move on from this guy. But Myles Garrett made it very clear he does not want to play for the Browns anymore. He wants to play for a contender. So he's another domino I think that could affect not only like what you do in the draft, but also what you do in free agency and things of that nature.
The Stafford, for example, somebody made this point. When we talk about quarterback competition for Anthony Richardson, okay, there's no competition if Matthew Stafford's the guy you sign, right?
No, Stafford would win it.
That's what I mean.
And I would start him.
Stafford is going to go. So it's a long-winded way of asking, is Stafford a candidate here?
I more or less asked Chris Ballard that this morning, and he wouldn't go there. I was like, because he said, everything's an option. And I was like, okay, if everything's an option, is a trade an option? And he's like, I see what you're doing, but he's like, we've done it in the past. I'll leave it at that. And so I guess all options are on the table until they're not, according to Chris Ballard. But I don't think they do that. I think they go out and they want to believe in Anthony, give him one more year. And so their competition is going to be a guy who probably flamed out somewhere else.
Give me an example. Daniel Jones?
Daniel Jones, Justin Fields, Jameis Winston. He'd be great for radio.
Jameis would be great. I mean, here's the thing. Let me just show right here, and maybe it's like Paola Plugola, but they dropped off St. Elmo, and I think they do this every year at the Combine, the St. Elmo cocktail sauce. You would need that if Jameis Winston's here for the crab legs, right?
I mean,
isn't that right?
He'd probably get a sponsorship somewhere in the city very quickly.
Yes. I mean, Jameis Winston is a dynamic personality.
I'd lobby for him to be like your midday co-host and see what rabbit holes you two go down together.
Well, he's a walking rabbit hole, right?
Yes.
Let me ask you this. If tight end is available for them and untaken at 14, that's where they're going, right?
I would think so. I mean, if Tyler Warren's still on the board at 14, which to me feels like a steal. I don't know if he even drops that far. If he's there, I'd take him, yes. Because, one, you're helping Anthony, which is number one priority, and two, you're filling probably your number one need when it comes to just positional value. You don't have any tight ends on your team right now.
Okay, are you ready? Are you ready for I'm preparing for it right now. I'm preparing for my favorite book of all time is Watership Down, which is written about a warren of rabbits, okay? And this question I'm about to ask you is a rabbit hole just as big as any on Watership Down.
Okay. I'm ready.
I'm prepared for you to take off the headsets, get up, and walk away. Okay?
Okay.
Is the best tight end on the Colts roster currently Anthony Richardson? He took off his headsets. He did not set them down.
I will not leave because I'm just not the kind of person. I love you, Jake.
70% flippant question, I realize.
But that is asinine. No, he is not a tight end. He's a quarterback until you say otherwise with your franchise.
Understood. But
quarterback, any team. He's never going to play tight end in the NFL. Never, ever.
I get it. But what I'm saying is, I'm saying that flippantly to say this.
You have no tight ends.
And you have no quarterback. But his athleticism, the reason, let's be real, the reason Anthony Richardson is still in the conversation as the quarterback for the Colts is because of his athleticism, not because of his quarterbacking ability, right?
I would think so. It's a lot of the if he hits upside potential, and as I said about this morning, potential, upside, all of those things are like backhanded compliments because it's like, oh, you could be good, but you're not good right now.
I've wondered this, and we don't know this. We know, I've been around it long enough to know that we do not know, we think we know. But in terms of knowing, understanding players behind closed doors, we don't. But you have a better vantage point with an Anthony Richardson, for example, than most because just the access that you have within the franchise. In your opinion and assessment, is Anthony Richardson, is it a maturity issue or is it a totally grasping and understanding everything that goes into being the quarterback that is hindered by the fact that his raw athleticism allowed him to naturally, to this point, get to where he is, and now he is finally having to go through things that he previously never has had to go through?
I think a lot of it has to do with the game kind of found him before he found the game, if that makes sense. Like, he kind of fell into being a high-level recruit and obviously a top-5 draft pick, and a lot of it is predicated on you have so many crazy physical gifts that you probably didn't hone them as much as somebody with lesser physical talent would have. And then also just the upbringing when it comes to the quarterback life. Like, he was in the Netflix series, I think it's called QB1, and him and Bryce Young were in the same season.
I watched it, yeah.
You look at Bryce Young's, just like he's been at every quarterback camp since he could throw a football, whereas Anthony, he never really went to those camps until he kind of became a star or whatever. Like, he didn't grow up in it, like just knowing how to be a quarterback from not only from a play style standpoint, Jake, but from a leadership standpoint. I mean, he just wasn't like indoctrinated into it.
James, to me, the biggest thing I took away from that was it illuminated the lack of resource that he had in high school in particular. I mean, he played at a high school that there were days that they didn't practice because it rained outside and they had no indoor facility. They had nowhere to go.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, the coaches that he had seemed like really good guys, but he didn't have individualized quarterback coaching. I mean, yes, to your point, it was.
Bryce played like a national schedule. They had everything they could ever imagine. It's just a different environment.
Richardson was hurt a lot too. Okay, last question for you then is this. You covered the NBA, right?
Yes, I did.
Pacers and Raptors tonight at the Fieldhouse, 7 o'clock. Indiana plays tonight, by the way, also against Penn State at 8 o'clock. In your time covering the NBA, Anthony Richardson's equivalent of an NBA prospect is who?
NBA prospect? Zion.
But Zion Williamson, though, well, let me rephrase that. In terms of they got all the time in the world and they were drafted high because of they had all of the intangibles, but they didn't necessarily know how to play the game. Would that be Zion still?
No, I think Zion has proven he's been an all-star, I believe, and he's had some success. Got a max contract. Obviously, we're talking about are the Colts going to pick up Anthony's fifth-year option next offseason? I'm trying to think of a player. It's hard to make comparisons like that. I mean, just physically gifted that didn't work out.
Okay, I'll tell you a guy that I thought is starting to show, and he didn't have the same level of expectation coming in, Jarris Walker.
More or less, or maybe like a guy like Scoot Henderson, where he was really, really, really hyped, and he's trying to figure it out now, but he isn't on that like Wemby level, and that's what the conversation was.
And Scoot Henderson needs to make sure that there is attrition in front of him because when he's got an opportunity, he's been okay, right?
Right.
But he is a little bit buried in Portland as the point because they have players at that position. Simons is at that position, right?
Right.
And so when he's got an opportunity, but yes, he did not establish himself. So that's
Ben Simmons? I mean, even Ben Simmons was like an all-star at one point.
Ben Simmons, by the way, is allergic to shooting the basketball, it would appear. I watched Ben Simmons the other night, and he is so to your point, that's a good one because he is so physically gifted, and he can dictate pace as well as anybody. But man, like, he gets right to the basket, and then you're thinking, well, there's a layup right there, and he's looking to pass. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? All right, James, what's the rest of the day looking like for you?
Not much, man. Got to knock out some things about the Colts. I know yesterday everyone kind of really latched on to the Anthony Richardson headline, but there's some other things that Chris Ballard said about Braden Smith, Samson Ebukam, others. So I'll dig deeper into that myself writing-wise, and then the rest of the day after that is just hopefully seeing a bunch of my friends before they leave town.
Okay, sounds good. James Boyd, you'll hear him tomorrow morning at 7 a.m.
Bright and early.
With the Fan Morning Show with Jeff Rickard and Kevin Bowen. We come back, Lance Zierlein, NFL Network, going to join us in the 1 o'clock hour. Shane Steichen just over an hour from now here on The Fan. When you were at the Combine, which is exactly where we are, you can find all kinds of folks that are here talking about, analyzing, breaking down the Combine, including our next guest from the NFL Network, the draft analyst Lance Zierlein. You can catch his crew on Combine Today. That airs today, Thursday, and Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern, and then Saturday and Sunday at noon Eastern on YouTube and the NFL's fastest channel as they break down all of the top prospects. And there are other ways that we'll let you know where you can hear Lance. But we hear him right now live on the radio station because he is here to talk about everything going on. Lance, let me begin with this, and I appreciate your time. The first question I would have is, it feels to me there have been years where the NFL Draft Combine, there's the obvious number one story, right? I mean, everybody knows who the number one quarterback is or who's going to go number one overall. This one, maybe it's because it feels like there are two quarterbacks towards the top, but maybe in most years they wouldn't be a 1, 2, or 3 pick, that it's one that kind of lacks an oomph storyline up front. Now, is that me being pessimistic or is that reality?
No, I think that's fair. It's not an exciting quarterback draft. It's kind of an interesting one in terms of, I think Cam Ward's the better player. Shedeur Sanders is to me, clearly the number 2 quarterback, although they're very different. One is Cam has more high-end talent. Shedeur is more accurate and has some of the poise and confidence that you like from a quarterback. One's a game manager, one's a playmaker. But in most drafts, I wouldn't take either one of these guys in the first round.
Right.
So
really, even the first round?
Nah, I mean, not likely because, it depends on the draft, right? So had it been last year, I'm not taking the 6th player in the first round, 6th quarterback in the first round. Probably not. Maybe if I really if I like Cam Ward enough to say I think he's a top 40 player, yeah, then you take him in the first round. You get the extra year on him. So, maybe Cam Ward would have been. I'm not sure on Shedeur. I think Shedeur could still slide in this draft. I don't think it's an absolute given that he goes inside the top 7 picks where most of us are mocking him. I think there is a chance that he could fall a little bit. So, so what's the next storyline? Well, the storyline right now is that we don't know what the Titans are going to do. We're all putting Abdul Carter there, but he might not. It might not be Abdul Carter. Maybe you go with the guy with the dual position flexibility. That's Travis Hunter, the Heisman Trophy winner. Maybe that's the story. But in the front end, I'm with you. I do radio as well, and of course, what I do television on the day of the draft. I do Path to the Draft on TV. So all we're doing is coming up with, hey, what are we talking about today? What's the narrative? What's the storyline? This year, the storyline is it's not as sexy. There's really good edge rushers and defensive tackles. Okay, cool. I mean, pass rushers is always a good thing. Defensive tackles, no one gets excited about defensive tackles, but it makes the world go round, frankly. And so last year you had edge rushers, you had quarterbacks, and you had offensive tackles. So you got pass rushers, you got guys to stop pass rushers, and you got guys who throw. And then you had a couple of really good you had 3 really good wide receivers and a guy who was a fantastic tight end in Brock Bowers. So you had, there was a lot going on in the first 20 picks. This year, kind of a dead zone in the middle of that draft, and a lot of it is picks 20 through 60 is where the sweet spot is.
Were you surprised Indianapolis went Latu last year in round 1?
I was. I'm not surprised about Rush. And in Latu, Ballard's tough to figure out sometime. All 3 of those guys I could have seen as Colts. And when I say 3 of those guys, for me it was Latu, Verse, and Dallas Turner. Those are the big 3. And then Chop Robinson is more of a developmental player. But I think it would have been interesting if Brock Bowers was still on the board.
One would think that they made effort to move up to get it. I mean,
I know that they had made an effort to move up.
Yeah.
I know that they made a strong effort to move up, and they were rebuffed. But he's one. I think Malik Neighbors would have been an interesting name for the Colts as well. But you would have had to move way up to get your hands on Malik Neighbors. But he was a special. I thought he was a special player coming out in last year's draft. I had him as the top player in last year's draft.
Will they be able to go?
Yeah, I have him as a top player in last year's draft.
Speaking of Indianapolis this year with tight end, because that's clearly a glaring need for them. Is the best tight end available going to be there at 14?
I'd say it's about a 50 to 60% chance. Warren will probably be off the board, but Colston Loveland is a great option. Might end up having a better pro career as a pass catcher than Tyler Warren. He's out of Michigan. If you don't get one of those two, then you're looking in the second round at Mason Taylor, more than likely from.
And how big a drop-off are we?
It's a drop-off, but it's not cataclysmic. Like he'd come in and be a really good option for the Colts. He'd come in and be a good starter. Like he'd have a chance to do some of the stuff Sam Laporta did his rookie year, only maybe not as many touchdown catches.
I've always felt like this. Lance Zierlein, our guest from NFL Network, that when you look at positions of need, sometimes it's not about the best player that's available to you right there, but rather the one that has the position that has the greatest drop off from one round to the next. In other words, you get where I'm saying there.
Yeah.
What position do you feel has the greatest depth where if you don't get the opportunity in round, say, 1 or 2, that you feel pretty good in, say, round 4 because there's enough depth there, it's not a huge drop?
Well, it's got to be running back. It's just tremendously loaded
and that's
with future starters
starting to gain some cachet.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and this happens to be a draft where there's a lot of guys who are bigger, stronger, physical. This is a draft where you can go find running backs to go get you a lot of carries. Now you can always find running backs who surprise you in the 5th or 6th round. But this is loaded with some quality guys that are going to be available in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. So I would say running back, and it's a pretty good tight end draft. You can find good tight ends. It's just, you're down to probably tier 3 tight ends, which is still their 3rd tier is pretty good this year, but the 3rd tier you start looking at rounds 4 and 5 where those guys are coming off the board.
When he was coming out, Lance, where did you have, and I know it would be top 5, but I mean, what were your overall thoughts on Anthony Richardson when he came out, and has your opinion changed?
Not really. I had him as a 2nd round pick. Thought he was a developmental player. Loved the upside, loved the traits. Just, had a real problem with accuracy. And it's been the same thing. I watched, my son's a big Colts fan, watched the Colts. I know a lot of the guys in that front office. And so I want him to succeed. I want the team to succeed. I want Anthony Richardson to succeed. I think the durability has been a big concern for me because he had some of that in college. And I think what he has to do is you have to have an offense that allows him to run the football. I mean, he's just not going to beat you throwing the ball 35 times a game. He's not. But he can beat you if he's less predictable and you're using that size. Well, if he's running, can he stay healthy? And I think that's the big concern is if he's going to be a dual threat quarterback, let's go. We'll set the offense up around it. You got some good weapons around him too. But if he can't stay on the field and he's not being the consummate pro or whatever the case may be, then you have a problem. So my opinion hasn't really changed on him. High ceiling, low floor.
It feels to me, and I want you to, maybe I'm too nuanced in this, Lance, because when you're on the inside and there's a team esoterically that you're covering, maybe you start reading too much into things. Okay?
Right.
So I want your perspective on this. Between yesterday and then this morning when Chris Ballard was on with our morning show, felt to me like for the very first time they were starting to be open to the discussion that, yes, in fact, I'm not going to say totally turn the page, but that they themselves are starting to finally have question about whether or not he is the guy.
So I think I can share this. I was on the field. I know Chris Ballard from when he was in Houston. I know him really well.
You guys go way back, right?
Yeah, we go way back. And I was on the field during the combine on that draft with Richardson, and I saw Chris, and he had something I have a lot of respect for. He said something. We speak very honestly, and he said, and we were looking, he goes, how about that guy? Look at him. And it's Richardson. And Richardson looks incredible. I mean, it was C.J. Stroud, Richardson, Levis. Those guys were studs. And then you had little Bryce Young who looked like a skateboarder out there. He's just completely different body type, but he didn't throw. And I said, but, I mean, you can't draft him. He's got a long way. You got to win right now. And he said, I don't have to win right now. I've got to do the best I can for the organization. And we started talking about it because, to me, there was 2 quarterbacks, and then there were 2 guys who had upside but low floors. They were boom-bust guys, Levis and Richardson. And Chris made a point to me. He said, why can't I draft him? I said, well, because he's, you got to win. You got to try to, you got to try to win. You, Chris, you got to win. The Colts need to win, and this guy can't. And he said, I got to do what's best for the Colts. Whether I'm that GM or not, I got to make moves that I think will, in the long run, help the Colts win. Whether I'm fired or I'm still here, everything I do has got to be for the Colts in the long term. And that's why he drafted Anthony Richardson. It wasn't because, and look, it's just been a bad spot. You lost Andrew Luck, and you were too good. You just couldn't draft where the good quarterbacks were. And a lot of those quarterbacks stunk anyway. They didn't end up being good quarterbacks. And so you kept trying to do everything you could by adding this quarterback. Finally, you're in the top 4, and you got 2 quarterbacks who are boom or bust type quarterbacks with great traits but are wildly inaccurate. And so I think Chris was trying to do the best he could to say, I want a guy that has a huge upside, and if it costs me, then it costs me.
Has he shown as a player, has he shown more tendency towards where the needle moves towards boom or towards bust?
No, bust, because he can't stay healthy. If you can't stay on the field, you can't. But, in that Texans game, like, he made some throws. He'll make some throws you say, holy crap.
Or some runs, right?
Or some runs where you say, holy crap. That could have been that first game against the Texans, he had a couple throws that were overthrows that could have turned into touchdowns where it could have been a completely different thing. And I think what Chris is doing right now is just saying, look, I got to do what's best for the Colts. And if that means getting a second quarterback. Now, I don't know who that quarterback's going to be, but you can't just hand it over to Anthony Richardson.
Does a quarterback come in here, though, realistically, if there's a quarterback that you're going to bring in for competition for Anthony Richardson, is that a quarterback that is going to be a guy you can win with if Richardson's not available to go? Meaning, if it's somebody that has the resume where they can win, are they going to come to Indianapolis? Because aren't they going to say, well, they got a guy that they took 3 years ago. There's no way they're going to give me an opportunity.
It depends. That's where you have a general manager that's honest, like Ballard's honest. I won't say to a fault. He's extraordinarily honest. You know that. Everyone knows it. He'll say what's on his mind. He'll tell an agent, he'll tell a player, he'll be honest with them and tell them the truth. I think a quarterback will get a legitimate shot, to beat out Anthony Richardson. It's not ideal, but you guys were one drop pass from a running back. I can't remember the back who dropped the pass. One drop pass against the Texans from being in the playoffs with Gardner Minshew. So the fact is, you got some linebackers, you got really good wide receivers, you need help at corner. I think Latu is going to be way better in year 2 because he's a very technically sound rusher. The Colts have a lot to win, but that's been one of the problems is they've been really close but just had this or that not shape up. And I don't know that you got to get your secondary tightened up. You need to replace Will Fries if he leaves. What are you doing with your right tackle from a cap standpoint? There's that question. But none of it really matters if you can't get solid play from quarterback. The Colts have a chance to be a playoff team with solid play. You don't have to have spectacular play. You just need solid play. But, Richardson's got to stay on the field, and he's got to grow as a player, which not having that first year to go through the lumps, man, that was a huge, huge loss.
Other places in which people can find you, read you, listen to you throughout your combine coverage.
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Lance Zierlein, Zierlein. You can watch me on NFL Network. You can watch me on Path to the Draft, the different shows. I'll be on 1-hour previews of every day, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. 1 hour before, I'll be on NFL Network with Bucky Brooks and Rhett Lewis, and we'll be giving you a heads up on who you should be looking at for that particular day.
And I love the fact that you show up at the NFL Combine wearing a hoodie of your favorite soccer club.
Yeah, it's Everton. I got to represent. They're not a very good team, so they need all the help they can get.
Okay, so before you go, let me ask you this. I've told people I need a soccer team, right?
Yeah.
A buddy of mine had told me Everton originally, but then everybody I saw was pulling for them, and I felt like it was a bandwagon. No offense.
It's not bandwagon. They're pulling for them because they're the remember when the Cubs used to always lose?
Oh, yeah.
That's who we are, minus all the wins. So, they're the lovable losers.
I'm going to give you the team that I've selected, and I want you to tell me what NFL team I've selected.
Okay. Because I selected the Texans.
Okay, that's so.
Only the Texans are better now. So.
Okay. I looked through. I have 2. I looked through all kinds of.
And this is going to tell me about who you are. Okay. By the way, when you tell me the team, I'm going to know who your personality is.
Me, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. There are 2, so I'm 50-50, and I'll let you pick which one I go with and which NFL team. Ipswich. And Nottingham Forest.
Oof. I mean, you're a glutton. I mean, Ipswich you're liable to be bad. I'd go.
Am I the Jaguars?
Oh yeah, you're picking first a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, so Ipswich is probably going.
Here's the thing, Lance.
Back down to the championship. Don't pick Ipswich.
But in the standings, it says, or like when they're on TV, it says IPS, and that's Indianapolis Public Schools, which I've always been a supporter of. So
yeah, no, I like that, but you're not going to be able to find them because they're going to be in the lower. They're going to get relegated. Let me tell you, one of the fun things when you start following soccer, which I started really, I picked Everton after I picked them in like 14, and I've been following them since then. Relegation is its old thing. You know, the three bottom teams beat it. You're going to the next level down. I'm telling you, my team is fighting. They're fighting against relegation for like the last 3 years. I'm watching these games like this is an NFC, like an AFC championship match.
Right.
I'm like, I was in London for a game that they had to win not to get relegated. In a pub with a lot of Everton fans, and it was
Which
like
would be fun, right?
It was the energy.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a blast! It was the energy of watching a Game 7 of an NBA Finals.
I go to a pub here where it's a Liverpool viewing party, and I find them to be goons. So
yeah.
Okay, so then last one, because I know you got to run. Nottingham Forest, my NFL team. That's who. I'm a fan of who.
Maybe the Jets. I would say no, because Jets have expectations.
But
you're like the Cardinals.
Okay, that's not terrible, right?
It's not terrible, but is it great?
But aren't they decent this year?
Yeah, they're better this year. But just because these teams move up now, it doesn't mean they're going to hang on.
Is Nottingham the Commanders?
Ooh, I don't know if they're the Commanders. Well, maybe. I think they've got some money. See, the key is you need to find somebody who just got some new money in. What you'll find out following soccer, I found out real quickly. I thought it was like all kind of a coin flip every year. And what you really find out is, oh, wait a minute. My team, everyone's going to steal players off of my team if my players get good because we don't have enough money.
You've been a fan
since for 11 years now. And so what happens is they'll take your players. If you have good players at Nottingham or any of these teams you're talking about, the Liverpools of the world are just going to buy your players away from you.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. When I'm going to Manchester for Oasis, and we're going to go over to Liverpool for a day. But
you're going too late. You won't be able to see any of the matches.
I know. It's after the season. But I'll be able to go get some Everton gear. I'll go to a pub and
I'd welcome you. It's a lot of fun. We've got a little bit of history, and we're always like, maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the year. It's not bad being an Everton fan. They're respected. They're just not,
Hey, I'm a Clemson football fan, so for a long time until Deshaun Watson came along, it was basically an Everton fan, right?
Yeah.
So
it was a long run, yeah.
I appreciate it, man. Good insights, and I appreciate it as always. Lance Zierlein from the NFL Network joining us here at the Combine again. Lance and his crew on Combine Today, airing Thursday and Friday, 2 o'clock Eastern, and then Saturday and Sunday at noon. You can find it on YouTube for Lance Zierlein. Good stuff. Ipswich, boy, I could tell the disappointment in his face when I mentioned Ipswich, so that's a tough sell, right? That was a tough sell.
I don't think he's coming back on the show now because of that. That's unfortunate.
It was a nice hoodie he had on, by the way, Eddie. Eddie, who's your soccer club? Did we decide a soccer club for you?
No.
Because we still have to determine our beer bet here, Eddie.
Oh, yes. I've forgotten about this.
We'll do this once I'm back in studio, obviously. But, again, the way that we do this, I looked through the over-under on expected wins this year in Major League Baseball and then paired them into groups of two. You have to pick one of the groups of two, and whoever has the highest win total with their group of two wins the beer. And I really want, and I wanted to ask you this, Eddie. The pairing that I want includes the White Sox, just because I have this soft spot now for the White Sox. I'm assuming you're going to give me the White Sox, right?
Yep.
Regardless of who they're paired with?
As long as they're not paired with the Reds, then yes.
I have them paired with the Reds.
Gosh darn it.
Okay, what about this? What if, this is really hard for me. I could pair them with the Cardinals, but I don't necessarily want the Cardinals.
If we make this a 1v1, you versus me here, I'm willing to alter the rules for you because I think Chicago White Sox are going to be so bad that you can have the team with the closest win total that is above 500.
Okay.
So that is near over
then how about
81
the Blue
and a
Jays?
half.
How about the Blue Jays?
Okay.
Can I take the Blue Jays?
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, you never know who you're going to run into here at the Combine. And I have no idea. I think she's actually on her way to the airport. But you know her from Wish TV. She's now in New York, and they just told me that we have to go to break as she comes over. So I'm going to ask Janae Coakley right here on the air, which is now – do you still go by Coakley, by the way? I know you've obviously been married since you left Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Do you have time to stick around?
How much time are you talking about?
15 minutes.
All right,
we have to
fine.
go to a break. And here's the thing, Janae. We have so many advertisers that line up to be a part of this program that the breaks are long. And then we come back and we have you.
Okay.
All
Obviously,
right.
they know I was coming, so the advertisers need to.
That's exactly correct. All right, Janae Coakley will join us. She'll do it on the other side. Okay, New York indeed is where you can find Janae Coakley. She was here. I can't believe, Janae, I'm making myself old, not you, but I can't believe that it's been since '09 when you were at Wish Television. And
we haven't aged at all.
Yeah, well, you haven't at all. Listen, I got gray hair and a stent, for crying out loud, since then. But we spent a lot of time on Friday nights on high school football fields, which was always fun. I was at 6, you were at 8, obviously. And it was very clear that you were on your way to bigger and brighter pastures. That includes now where you have been for 16 years at SNY in New York, covering primarily the Jets, along with all sports. But you come here each and every year. The Jets are usually a big talking point at the Combine. They're a talking point in the NFL right now as much of anything, just because of where they're coming from with the Aaron Rodgers situation. Let's begin with that. The quarterback situation, I would assume they're in the same boat as Indianapolis. Great uncertainty at that position. Where do the Jets go there?
Well, I feel like the last 15 years I've discussed this each year about, the Jets quarterback, looking for the quarterback. Aaron Glenn, obviously they've turned the page on Aaron Rodgers' era. That's done. Aaron Glenn's now taking over, and they'll say they'll look through free agency, they'll go through the draft, to do any way they can. But right now they have Tyrod Taylor on their roster, and he's won plenty of games. He can get through. He's been with this team for now. This is his second year, and locker room loves him. He's a great guy.
Now, in terms
of the long-term answer, no, but they do have a quarterback.
With Rodgers, and I don't mean to ask it this, I guess, candidly, but with Aaron Rodgers, did you feel like now all of a sudden, at least for a 2-year window, that the question was taken care of and that we weren't going to be back in this situation?
Yeah. Up until, the Jets have talent on their roster. They have some great guys, and they're just kind of missing that one piece, that quarterback. And you get Aaron Rodgers. You see the way this man plays and practices, and you watched him during training camp. You watched the way the team just rallied around him. You watched the way he threw. You're like, wow, this is it. And then Monday night game, 9/11. It was the lights, the crowd, the everything. And then 4 plays in, it's done. Tears his ACL, or Achilles, tears his Achilles. You could physically feel, Jake, the crowd, everything everything is deflated. And you just knew at that point, well, here we go again.
But he didn't play terribly last year, and yet they've decided to move on, right?
He was hurt a lot of the beginning of the year. It was up and down. They got rid of Salah, obviously. He finished the year decent. He had good numbers and stuff, but with Aaron Rodgers, there comes a lot on and off the field, and it's a new regime. They want to start fresh. Aaron Glenn is coming in, and he wants his own team.
When you look back on your time in Indy, you covered, from an NFL standpoint, you covered great teams, right?
Oh, unbelievable, yes.
You basically bookended the 2 Super Bowls, if I'm not mistaken,
yep.
Right?
My worst season I covered was 10-6, and that was the year they went to the Super Bowl and won.
Isn't that
crazy?
And they beat the Jets in the AFC title game,
yep,
right?
My last year.
Oh, no.
That was the last year.
They went to the Super Bowl and lost, you mean?
No, the worst year was my first year covering the Colts. They were 10-6. They went to the Super Bowl and won, and then after that was like 11 and
The
whatever.
Interesting thing, you could make the argument, Janae, that the team that won the Super Bowl here was probably, if you were to rank Tony Dungy's teams, maybe 3rd.
That's what I'm saying. Yes. Yeah. That's what I'm
point.
saying. That team wasn't necessarily the best team, but they played together and it was great, and they won. And I remember even better, they'd lost 6 games. And I remember fans were going crazy, like, oh, my gosh.
Oh, they gave up 275 yards rushing to Jacksonville. And,
Now, looking back after covering the Jets, oh, my gosh, Jets fans, oh, my gosh, if they lost 6, oh, my gosh, that would be the best season ever.
Now, the fireman fella, is he back? He went on strike for a while, right?
I don't know. I'm not a big fan, I'll be honest.
Fireman Ed? Why not? He kind of felt like he was part of the team, right? Okay.
We'll just move on from that.
Let me ask you this. So you grew up.
There's some really great fans. That's all I'm saying.
I kind of like the Jets.
The Jets fans are awesome. Jets fans are awesome.
Joe Namath went to go see Bobby Brady at his house when he thought he was sick, and it was a ruse, and he still let him throw around the football in the backyard. It's cool, right? Now, here's the thing. So you grew up in, and I'm testing my memory here. You grew up in Connecticut.
No, upstate New York.
Upstate New York. Sorry.
I live in Connecticut. Went to school in Connecticut.
I was going to say you went to college in Connecticut,
yes.
right? You went from a television standpoint at some point to Yuma, Arizona.
Yep. Nice job.
You went from Yuma, Arizona to, was there a stop before Indianapolis?
I started in Billings, Montana.
Okay, that
So I went to
cool,
Billings,
right?
Montana. Yep, that's why my area code's in my
Cover
phone,
rodeos?
406. I did.
Did you really?
It was awesome. I covered the rodeo, which is fabulous. Then I went to Yuma, Arizona, and I got to cover like the Senior Olympics, which like senior citizens, because a lot of older people live in
So
Arizona.
I'm in that now, yeah.
Yeah, well, not yet. You're not quite there yet.
A couple years
and
away.
then I moved to Indianapolis and got to, I mean, this is the sports capital of the world.
And then you go from, and this is why I asked this, and I think you know this, Janae. Like I love Indianapolis, right?
Oh, it's fab. Yeah.
And I'm always curious because you are, part of a lot of people who have come through Indianapolis and gone on to much bigger things from Indianapolis. But I am curious, how did Indianapolis help shape you, I guess, both professionally and personally both? Or did it? I mean, do you think about Indianapolis now that you are in the bright lights of the big city?
I got to cover actually more stuff in Indianapolis as far as sports-wise than I do actually in New York. Indianapolis was amazing. I loved Indianapolis. Everybody will say, oh, going back to your city. Oh, going back to your city. I haven't been here in 16 years.
Right.
I still have great friends someone's listening right now on the radio, and I'm going to go meet her in a minute. I just love India, and it taught me so much. I learned how to cover professional sports. I learned how to, be the reporter I am today and be confident and become guys like Rich Nye, Chris Widlick, you, Jake, AC, Chris Hagan, I can just name them through and through, help me become who I am, because I got to watch and see how you cover every sport. From high school football, high school basketball, to professional football, to Butler, IU, Purdue. Then don't forget you had the natatorium. I got to cover diving and swimming. Indianapolis 500. Let's go from there.
I mean, the race had to be, that's a big animal,
ever.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, but it's just
grind.
The thing that would be hard, I think, and where I give you a ton of credit, Taylor Tannenbaum gets a lot of credit in this regard, a lot. But you come in, and I'm assuming that you probably had zero reason to understand or know the Indy 500 before coming here because it's fairly esoteric now in today's day, and yet you have to learn it quickly, right?
And I'll be honest with you. If someone would have before told me that Indy is a sport, race car driving is a sport, I would have said, okay, sure, whatever. I have so much respect. In fact, I called my husband when we were flying there. I'm like, hey, let's bring the kids to Indianapolis 500. We got to go to the Indy 500. I got to take them because it's so cool. It's an unbelievable sport, and it's an awesome sport, and I fell in love with it.
The event itself is unbelievable.
Oh, unbelievable.
Right?
But I fell in love with race car driving.
Do you feel a responsibility? Responsibility is maybe the wrong word. Before I let you go, the reality is this, Janae. In Indianapolis, when you were here in particular, you're doing sports, and you're doing sports as, you're kind of part of a pioneer group because females covering sports was not necessarily as prevalent as it is today. Minorities in television also, even though, I'm not pretending that it's 1958, but at the same time, it would be naive of me to say that we don't have still a long way to go. You represent a lot of people, and you represent a lot of young people that look up to you and see you as their reason for belief that they can achieve something. Do you stop to grasp that?
Every day. I really do, actually, especially now that I have a daughter. And I see, there wasn't a lot of representation when I was growing up. And certain things I didn't see someone who could do that, so why would I think?
Right.
Even, where I grew up, there's no one who looked like me as a teacher, as a principal. And then I realized it, and then I just hosted an event for the Jets. They do this unbelievable thing with girls flag football. And there were 70 schools, high school girls flag football teams, and a girl came up to me. She goes, I want to do what you want to do. And she looked like me. I'm mixed. My father's black, my mother's white. I have the curly hair. I'm kind of a tomboy. Whatever. And she's like, I want to do what you're doing. How do you do it? And I'm like, well, the best advice I can give you is just be true to who you are and learn from people. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to learn and be critiqued. Like I said, I learned, Jake, how many times were you on the phone? You teaching me about IU basketball.
Yeah, I don't know that I teach anybody anything other than how to not be, right?
No,
isn't
that's not true.
Isn't that probably fair,
know more
right?
stuff. But women today, especially.
We did. I will say, I think.
I asked a lot of questions. I learned a lot of the history of Indiana sports because it's important to know where you're from. And what you're covering.
One of the things about this city that I think has been, because I've worked in other markets, and One of the things that's unique about here, I think that people assume that because you're at Channel 6 or 8 or 13 or 59 or 4, whatever it may be, that means that you are automatically competitors. And we are competitive. But at the same time, I do think that there is a feeling of all trying to help each other out in that regard, right? Of understanding what we need to do to get where we need to go.
I always said the people who are the best at their jobs are the ones that are willing to help others, because they're not. And I learned so much from being everything I pretty much know about this sports world. I learned being here in Indianapolis. I was telling Chris Woodlick, who was my first boss, I'm like, I learned a work ethic. I learned how to log games. I still log games.
Which, for those that don't know, it's you're sitting there and you're watching plays and you're writing down what time it happens, so that then when you go back to the video, you can say 1:14:38.
And you don't have to do that anymore. People make fun of me all the time in the press box. They're like, "What are you doing today? You can get it on the computer." I'm like, "Because this is how I was learned. This is how I was taught how to do it, and I follow the game better." I mean, I still do. Rich and I had his colored pencils.
Hell yeah!
Come on, right?
Rich and I is literally the greatest human. Rich and I, honestly, he's the only person I know that the pearly gates. He has like global entry, right?
Yes.
Like they literally, there's no TSA for him at the pearly gates. They're like, well, here you are.
Here,
yeah.
yes.
I mean, it's the Rich and I gates, probably, right?
Again, you learn somewhere every stop you go, but this always will have a special place in my heart.
Well, it's cool to see, each and every year to see you, covering New York's New York. It's the greatest city in the world, right?
It is.
And to see that you're doing well, and obviously two beautiful kids, so it's always good to see you again. The Jets are drafting where in the draft? 7th, and they're taking what position? Any?
Tight end, O-line.
You can't say tight end. That's what the Colts need, Janae. Come on.
The quarterback, but I'm not sure the quarterback's there right now. What are the Colts drafting?
Well, one would think tight end, but
no, but what position?
14.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, we do need a tight end. We need a receiver though too. We need a quarterback. We need a cornerback.
Usually, the bottom line is usually if you're drafting between 7 and 14, you got a lot
everything.
of needs, right?
Exactly,
you got a lot of needs.
Exactly.
Hey, Janae, it's always good to see you. I'll let you get running. I know you got places to be, but I appreciate the time. As always, good seeing you, and enjoy being back home, all right?
I love it. And you know who I'm talking to. Come pick me up. I'm ready to go.
All right, there we go.
Right.
Janae's shout-out. That Janae's implying that people are listening to this program.
They are.
Probably unlikely. Your chance to come out, by the way, and help out by talking NFL and doing so. I don't know what happened. There we go. There we go. Your chance. Thank you, Janae. Janae Coakley, formerly of Wish Television. You can come out, come downtown, talk NFL, have a cold beer, and help out the city of Indianapolis. We'll get into that, and we'll also preview a little bit of what's going to happen tonight at Gainbridge Fieldhouse between the Pacers and the Toronto Raptors. Indiana playing tonight against Penn State as well. All of that and Shane Steichen still to come here from our Combine coverage on The Fan. The next guy that just walked past, and he doesn't know who I'm comparing him to, so I say this lovingly. He's the Eddie White of Denver. That's the easiest way to say it. Brandon Cristal, and I'm not even sure how Brandon and I met one another. I think it was because somehow or another you entered and lost some social lottery where you got to know Derek Schultz, right?
That's it. Schultz and I met, I think, at one of the Final Fours. I went to the Final Four every year with Westwood One and used to do shows from there, but then started, because I knew a lot of people, helping them book the guests and get the coaches and get other VIPs. And so Westwood One so I've been to 18 Final Fours, including seeing Stupid Duke win a few here in Indy. But I love coming here for the Combine. My first Combine was the year Andrew Luck and RG3 were coming out. And that was the first year that I got to go to Peter King's event at Sun King that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I do know Eddie White. He was in the suite with us with Sean Payton, which we're not supposed to talk about. But Sean Payton took some of us Denver reporters to the game, and Eddie
worked
came
out
by.
because the Nuggets were here, right?
The Nuggets were here. It was unofficially my idea because last year, again, I'm not supposed to talk about it. It's like Fight Club, but he may have taken some of us to an actual steak dinner at Prime 47. So I'm talking to Broncos PR, and I say, hey, I'm going to run back and forth, do pregame, postgame, and then go hang out for the dinner. He's like, well, maybe we'll just get a suite at the game.
Here's the thing, Brandon.
The game.
I always tell Eddie this, and you can borrow his dustpan for name drops, right? That's.
Hey, you got to learn from the best. You know, you drop them, pick them up on the way out.
He is the best, right? Guerrilla Sports is where you're now working in Denver, so you cover obviously all of the Denver teams. Nuggets are really good, by the way. Nikola Jokic is
fun to
watch.
He's
a point center, right?
It's crazy. So the other night he has 19 assists, his career high, and in typical Joker fashion, we asked him about it post game. He's like, yeah, I was just trying to make the right play. But all-time assists for centers. So he's second in a single game now with 19. He had 18 earlier this year. That's now third. Wilt has it at 21. But of the top 25 assist performances by a center in a single game, Joker has 21 of the 25, and Wilt has the other 4.
I was going to say, because Chamberlain led the league in assists one year. It's interesting because when you watch him, and I think this benefits him. And you're around it more than I, obviously, in covering him, so you can opine on this. Because he looks labored and just like one aspirin from a coma at all times, I think that benefits his play because the game is slow to him. And everybody else is freaking out, and he's seeing things 2 plays ahead.
He's got that thing that Steve Nash had, that LeBron certainly has, where, they're playing 3D chess and everybody else is playing regular chess or checkers, depending. Right. And so it just is crazy to see in a guy that's 6'11", 7 foot, that weighs 260, 70 pounds. But his game is going to translate as he gets older. He just turned 30 last week, so there's a lot of talk about where he was as a 20-year-old to a 30-year-old. And we don't know how long he's going to play. I thought with him having young kids, he's got a 4-year-old daughter, now a 3-month-old son, that maybe he'll want them to watch him play.
How old is Jokic?
He just turned 30 a week ago.
Okay.
And so I asked him the other day, because, we're asking him all these questions. I said, are you going to maybe play longer if your kids want to watch? He's like, no, I'm selfish. So he basically said that he's going to stop whenever he wants to stop. But he really does love basketball. He just doesn't talk about it a lot. Christian Brown, my fellow Jayhawk, kind of is the Joker, not translator, but lets us peek behind the curtain because he's like, oh, yeah, Joker texted me the other night about he's watching this on League Pass, knew I was watching it. Hey, did you see that play so-and-so ran? He's like, so I get texts like that from Joker all the time.
So he is a game student.
He is a game student.
Right.
We just always assume he's watching like Serbian Netflix or whatever because you know how much he loves Serbia. The second the season's over, he's on a plane. He wants to get back and hang out with his horses. And that's going to be, I think, what he ends up doing when he's finally done playing. But he really does love the game as much as the Lakers took it to him Saturday night. He only had 7 shot attempts. He's going to thrive on their next 2 matchups in getting ready for it, like that chess match or that test to try to solve because he can unlock every puzzle. He's that kind of guy.
It's interesting. Brandon Cristal is our guest for the Guerrilla Sports in Denver. You've been in Denver for,
18 years.
Yeah, I was going to say a long time now, covering sports, and you come for the Combine every year. And I appreciate this. I truly appreciate that you have, in your time coming to Indy, aside from annually, letting me and if Derek's around or whatever, poke at you. But, that you are invested in an event that is helping out the city of Indianapolis. And we're talking about Indy Parks. You can let us know how people can get involved. But this has become a fun event every year at Sun King. And I'm talking about one that's going to take place Friday night at 6 o'clock, right?
Yeah, and the Sun King guys, as everybody in town knows, are great. I'm sure there's some other great breweries, but they've got to be one of the biggest and most popular, if not at the very top of the list. And that first combine that I came to in 2012, was invited by Peter King just to come hang out, and invited my friend Brent Joseph, who at the time had King David's dogs, and he's like, oh, I'm friends with the Sun King guys. So we just go to watch Peter King talk football. Well, then the next year or whatever, Peter invites me up on the panel, and then he starts having, instead of it just be, it was like a chalk talk meetup, like let's just talk football with reporters. He then has like Chris Ballard's come, Shane Steichen came. Last year, the linebacker, who I'm drawing a blank on, who's the linebacker that's got the great personality? Zaire Franklin.
Yep.
He came. Zaire was great. Mr. Irsay donated $10,000 one year. It's become really cool. There aren't any players that can make it by this year. I was talking with the folks from the Colts, but they're going to send over some cool stuff for the auction. And yeah, it all goes to the Parks Alliance here in Indy. Every year there's been a different charity. Peter, of course, retired. So Kaylin Kaler from now ESPN, but formerly Peter's protege at SI, she kind of is spearheading it, and I help her along the way, especially with the auction stuff. But like a couple years ago, Adam Schefter shows up. So there's 6 or 7 of us from different markets, and you'll get fans from these random teams that want to ask me a Broncos question or want to ask somebody a Raiders question. Well, when Adam Schefter shows up, then everybody wants to ask Adam questions, which I get. So we all just kind of get out of the way. Or Albert Breer will be there from SI and the MMQB. I think Ian Rappaport's going to be there this year. Mike Silver, who just wrote a great book about all those coaches, Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, all those guys. And you don't know exactly who all is going to be there because we've got a bunch of RSVPs of maybe. So if you're a football fan, it's $25. Come down. It gets you a free beer. You get to ask some questions. You can help. It all goes to raise money for Parks Alliance here in Indy, and maybe you'll buy something cool. Last year I got Blake Corum and J.J. McCarthy to sign a Michigan mini helmet. There happened to be a Wolverines fan there that paid a few $100 and got themselves a pretty unique autograph.
And people can buy the tickets where?
At Eventbrite.com. You can go to my Twitter or Kaylin's. But my Twitter's just at BK Denver Sports. Kaylin's is just at Kaylin Kaler. She was on your morning show yesterday. But, yeah, it's just there's probably an even more direct way to get there. But if you just go to Eventbrite.com and look up Sun King, it'll pop right up. It's called the NFL Combine Meetup with ESPN's Kaylin Kaler, and then the rest of us are going to be there hanging out and just talking football and
well, it's great. I mean, I appreciate it because it helps out the city. It helps out the Indy Parks Alliance, and it gets everybody together, and people love it. I mean, I know people have had a great time out there because what's better than having a cold beer? Diet Coke's perfectly sufficient, but a cold beer and listen to you guys talking football and sports. And Brandon, it's always good to see you, man, every year when I do see you. And Denver is Shannon's hometown, so I've got a love for Denver as well, and have her family's there as well.
All that deal. Yeah, we got some good shows coming up this summer.
Red Rocks is awesome.
It's the best. It is.
Red Rocks is really cool.
You're never going to come across an artist, a musician, that's played it. And you ask them their favorite venue in America, and they're going to tell you it's Red Rocks.
Oh,
it's 100%.
Do you ever go and run Red Rocks just in the?
I have watched people run Red Rocks plenty, including Nikola Jokic.
And after you run Red Rocks, you can enjoy a Sun King if you happen to have one there nearby. Brandon, we appreciate it, man. Jake, as always, good seeing you. We come back. Shane Steichen, 2 o'clock hour, going to join us right here at the Combine. And again, as I'd mentioned, Pacers and IU. We'll get into some round ball talk as well on this Wednesday Hump Day edition. Aquarian Company here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Hour number 3 underway here at the NFL Combine. For that matter, it's hour number 3 everywhere in the Eastern Time Zone. How are you? My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison, the other voice that you hear on this program. By the way, should mention, Cameron Blankenship is here as our on-site engineer. Nick Cottingem is running everything in terms of the website to make sure that you can see and hear. If you are watching on YouTube, it is greatly appreciated. I even showered before coming in today because I knew I was going to be in a public setting.
You didn't even do your little smile and wink at the camera, Jake.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me.
There you go.
How about that? Yeah. Okay. We just saw the number spike, right?
That's right.
I joke about the fact that I showered before I came on. The one thing about me in terms of show prep, more than anything else, I'm very hygienic. Wouldn't you agree, Eddie? I always look like $1 million.
Yeah,
right?
I'm glad you've dialed it back a little bit on the cologne as well. I used to get migraines.
Well, that's the problem is I have so many colognes I can't tell the strength of the scent of which I'm putting on. Strength tonight and by the way, Shane Steichen going to join us in the 2 o'clock hour. He is over at an NFL Women's Forum at the JW Marriott next door, and when that concludes, he will be coming over. Now, there's a gal running around with a camera right now and a microphone letting everybody know what's going on at the Combine. Should I interrupt her live shots here? Is it I mean, I'm on television, and I don't know that I've given my clearance, even though I'm on the YouTube right now. A little nervous about that. Pacers in action tonight. We will obviously shift to Shane Steichen when he does arrive sometime in this hour. But the Pacers in action tonight, taking on Toronto at the Fieldhouse. Reality is this, and that is the game against Denver. Brandon was just talking about it. When you look at that game, and, I do think, and Eddie, feel free to chime in here, that was one of those that it's a disappointment because they had opportunities before themselves to kind of get over the hump when they got it within, say, 3 to 5, especially late in the game. Indiana in the first half of that game against the Nuggets got it down just before the half. They got it within a basket, but that was when Jamal Murray was on the bench. Murray had not necessarily gotten going offensively from a scoring standpoint, but just his presence does kind of draw things out where then Jokic is able to dish down low, part of his 19 assists, to guys cutting in from the backside. And that's what Denver was able to do. But once Murray was out, it made it a little easier to guard the Nuggets. And so the Pacers got close, and then Denver pulled back out to the lead at the half. In the second half, it just seemed like fatigue. And I know that I kept saying that on Monday, or on Tuesday. But, you could see just the legs were a little bit dead for them. And they were not able to hit shots. Now, obviously, Eddie, one would assume tonight this is the kind of game that you need to kind of reset. And look, they've lost to Toronto. So I'm not saying that the Raptors aren't a team that can come in here and get them. But it is really cause for concern if they don't get it tonight. One would think that this is a good chance to kind of get back on the right side of things.
100%, Jake. And it's worth noting here that Toronto just played last night. So it is a Sega Baba for them. So,
Eddie, listen. Nobody uses – I know you think it sounds cool. Sega Baba's ridiculous. Second game of a back-to-back. Easier to say, right?
No, Sega Baba, much easier. They played last night against Boston. This was in Toronto. They lost by 10 at 111-101. So Indiana should have the rest advantage. I'm fascinated to see what the injury report looks like in terms of availability. T.J. McConnell and Tyrese Halliburton are both listed as questionable. McConnell with a ankle sprain, and then Tyrese dealing with groin soreness, I think is how it was labeled. I actually, Jake, saw him last night at Decatur Central High School. He was taking in a Decatur Central High School Beach Grove basketball game, and
really?
I did not ask him about the groin.
Now hold on. I want to back this up.
Okay.
So Beach Grove and Decatur Central. This is boys basketball, right?
Correct.
And you were there in a fan capacity or working capacity?
So Olivia is an assistant coach at Decatur for one of the swim teams, and I was there as a timer last night. And after I had finished timing, the events that I was asked to time for, I was talking with some of the athletic administration there because I have deep ties, Jake. I'm a celebrity to them.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. And they were telling me, like, hey, Tyrese, come here. I was like, what? I was like, why? They're like, one of the people that works for the Pacers has a son that's on our team here. It's an off day, and he asked if Tyrese could come watch. So Tyrese, James Johnson, Isaac Jakob, and I don't know who else was with them, all showed up last night at Decatur Central High School.
Okay, so how many people were at the game?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I didn't thoroughly examine the crowd. I just
But
popped
I mean,
in to
I
see
would
he was here.
imagine that had to create a certain amount of buzz, correct?
Oh, yeah, there was a little bit of a buzz. Like, people in the concourse outside the concession stand at, like, halftime were like, hey, did you see Tyrese Halliburton's here? Hey, Tyrese is here. I wonder why he's here. Why is he here?
Did you get? And I'm asking this somewhat seriously and somewhat, I mean, mostly seriously actually. Did you get any indication by in terms of his movement or whatever else? Would you have guessed that he was in fact in any sort of a question mark in terms of his health or his, I hate to say his groin, but I mean just in the injuries that have bothered him?
No, not at all. I mean, he was sitting the entire time that I saw him, so I didn't actually see him walk in or move around or whatnot, so I can't give you an answer in that regard.
Okay, so Halliburton last night was at the game, which is pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
McConnell is one because T.J. McConnell was obviously not in the game against Denver, and Rick Carlisle, talked about, I think, just the importance of T.J. McConnell and what he brings to the table. I was actually, and Eddie, I will bring you into this conversation as well, which I think is a great one. And there's one person to me that I didn't think of as the obvious answer here. But over the weekend on Saturday, we went to the Pro Volleyball Federation All-Star match at the Fishers Event Center, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. The Indy Ignite had 4 players represented. Legator member Mena, who has been on this program, she's a member of the company. She was one of the All-Stars, but did not play because she's out with injury. But in watching it, we're sitting there watching, and Kevin Pritchard was there as well. And so I said to Shannon, Kevin Pritchard was not with us, but he happened to be there. Mm-hmm. So in seeing Kevin Pritchard, I said to Shannon, what Pacer player do you think would be the best volleyball player? Now, we went back and forth. Shannon gave me her answer. I gave my answer. And then we were discussing it. I kind of, as we were leaving, we did say hello and exchange pleasantries with Kevin Pritchard, and I asked him his answer, and he kind of joked about it, and then we both concluded to the same player. But I'm curious, Eddie, for you, if the Pacers were a volleyball team, who's the best volleyball player?
Okay, let me ask you this. Are the injuries slider in like NBA 2K, are they off, or is injuries still apply? Like if this player is injured, can I say
No,
him?
this is if all players are healthy.
Isaiah Jackson.
Boy, that's hard to argue. Yeah.
Now,
okay.
my second would be Obi Toppin because of his explosiveness as well, being up at the net and having to block,
Okay. Nick Cottington, who's sitting here right now, came with the same answer that I did. I 100% agree with what Nick just threw to me in terms of the player. Shannon went with Tyrese Halliburton or Miles Turner. And I think Miles Turner, for the same reasons that you're talking about, right? I mean, the rim protection, you would think at the net he would be an incredible, just defensive player, if you will. Mm-hmm. Toppin and Jackson, the thought of them flying in for whatever you would call it, a spike, is really hard to argue. I went with the same player as Nick just because I think his versatility. I could see this guy being a setter. I could see this guy being, a finisher, whatever. Aaron Nesmith was my pick because I like his versatility in terms of his athleticism. And then when we were talking about it, and Kevin Pritchard, and I will tell you, in defense of Kevin Pritchard did not give me an answer per se because I kind of cut him off and said, let's be honest. We both know the answer probably somehow inexplicably is T.J. McConnell. And he said T.J. McConnell would probably be like the perfect setter, right? Like he just would be a guy that is always in the right spot. That's the thing about him. And I think that they missed that a little bit the other night. And he's just always in the right spot. And I think that he has an ability to just kind of, if you will, just kind of sneak up on people, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Now, did you just tell me, Eddie, to get to break? Is that what you just said?
Yes.
I know when people like when we live produce on the radio, but it's because, and it's an unusual time to do so, but we are anticipating Shane Steichen from the Colts, and we are anticipating him coming over. Lots to talk about with Shane Steichen, including the big topic. And yes, I will ask the most obvious question, and we'll do it when Shane Steichen joins us when he gets his way over here from the NFL Women's Forum at the JW on this Combine live coverage on a Wednesday on The Fan. Combine well underway, and it is that time where we get to catch up with Shane Steichen. Last time we talked to you, as a matter of fact, was just right at the start of training camp, I think, in terms of this capacity. Appreciate the time. I'll begin with, I guess, just kind of the overview of, maybe it's asking the obvious, but in terms of your coming into this now, this is, you're entering year number 3. So you look at things now differently in what way than when you were maybe more of a wide-eyed coach coming into this process?
Yeah, I think obviously when you're coming in first-year head coach, obviously you're just, getting your feet on the ground and you're hitting the ground running and establishing what you want, from a football aspect and how you want to run things from a meeting standpoint, what you want those things to look like. And then you go into your, your first off-season training camp, you go through your first season, and then the second season, you kind of have a schedule of what you want it to look like. And then going into year 3, depending on how the first 2 years go, you're sitting at 500, back-to-back years. And obviously you're doing a lot of evaluation process after the first 2 years, to get us into that playoff hunt. So going through that right now is a big process for us.
When you look at yourself, before we get to the areas where the team needs to improve, you look at your own coaching style or the last 2 years, and you find areas that you feel you need to improve where?
Yeah, I think looking at that, it's a great question. I think obviously being the head coach, you're the leader of the football team. And every day I think messaging is very important with your culture and how you go about that. So I take pride in that as having a great message every single week and making sure the guys understand how we're trying to win a football game every single week. So there's no gray area with that. You know what I mean? So you got to make sure you're prepared on, Monday, that game review, what that looks like. Tuesday, obviously, is a player's day off. And then Wednesday, that Wednesday morning team meeting is critical. You know what I mean? I think it's very critical on setting the stage for the week and what that needs to look like and how we're going to win the football game. And then we got to go out and execute it and have a great week of preparation and practice. And then Saturday night meetings are huge, too. It's a last message before you go out and take the field on Sundays. And I think that, as a head coach, is you got to be on that, you know what I mean? Because each year, you use information and you got to keep gathering information as you keep going. So in these off season, I'm always looking at things. I'm calling other coaches that have done it at a high level. You're reading stuff. You're looking at stuff, so you stay connected and committed, to these guys through that process.
This process is obviously, you and I were talking about it just before we went on here. Part of this is getting to know prospects, trying to get a read on what their approach is and those kinds of things. Did you guys accurately read the mentality and approach of Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, we did our due diligence there. Obviously, we did a private workout with him, spent a lot of time with him, brought him in, vetted, called coaches that he was with, coaches that I knew that had coached him, going through that process. And I think you got to turn over every rock, to figure out that person and obviously get to know him through that process, I think is a big part of it.
When, I'm sure you're no stranger to this. Shane Steichen, the head coach of the Colts here, a big buzz that came out of the last 24 hours here from the Colts standpoint is you guys and Chris Ballard talking about the open competition at quarterback. Are you as confident in Anthony Richardson today as you were 1 year ago today?
Yeah, I think with anything, we're just looking for the consistency. I said that the other day in my press conference is we're looking for that consistent player. Obviously, going into year 3, been banged up the last 2 years, and, playing a full 17-game season is going to be critical for his success and being consistent with his process day in and day out.
So here's one of the things, and they talked about this morning with Chris, and I thought it was a really interesting question from James Boyd, and I want to run it past you. If you're bringing in a quarterback for competition and they know that they're competing against a guy that was the number 4 player taken in the draft, the reality is, Shane, you know this. I mean, a lot of times guys get the window is maybe dictated on how they were acquired or where they were acquired. Can you honestly get a guy that comes in that feels it really is a competition as opposed to a window dressing title of it?
Yeah.
When they know they're going against a guy
I think
like
Chris hit that the other day. I think, it's a guy that, has had production in this league, you know what I mean? I think you got to, look at it that way. And obviously we're doing our due diligence and looking, in free agency and, seeing how that thing plays out.
Could it be, will you look at quarterback in this draft?
Yeah, we always look at quarterbacks, though, every draft, no matter what.
Right.
We take Anthony, 2 years ago. We still look at quarterbacks, this past season. We look at him now. Even when I was with the Phillip Rivers for years and years and years, we always did our due diligence and looked at the top guys every year because it's such an important position. So you always do, study on that.
In terms of the offseason work for Richardson, obviously we know that accuracy is still the white whale. New coach that he's going to be working with in it. Take me through just kind of the overall process and how involved you are in that day-to-day.
Yeah, obviously he's been with those guys, the last couple of years. Obviously last year was a rehab process for him with those guys, but this year is, he's healthy going into that process, and we have conversations with those guys, and obviously he has our information of how we do things. But I think from a biomechanics standpoint, I think that's really good to work on the fundamentals. I mean, these guys do a hell of a job with him down in Florida, and he's going through that process right now, grinding away down there. So looking forward to, when he comes back.
When you guys are analyzing the draft itself and the prospects, do you look at this draft as one where you have very specific needs and you've got to go with the best player at that need? Or are you in a position where you've got kind of needs across the board and you go best player?
I think it's a little bit of both. You know what I mean? Sometimes you do have needs that you really have to address. But obviously, if there's a really good player on the board in the draft, you don't want to pass up on a great player that can really change your football team. So I think it's a little bit of both.
How much discussion, let's say, and let me give you, I'll put it to you this way, Shane, the outside perspective, okay? I'm going to give you the perspective from a radio host, and then I want you to grade for me how accurate it is.
All right.
Okay? The radio host assumes that during the draft, Chris Ballard watches tape, interviews guys, talks to people, and then says, I really like this guy, and then goes to the head coach and says, just so you know, this is the Lego piece I'm giving you, and you figure out where it fits.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of collaboration that goes into that before the draft. Obviously, Chris and his staff and everybody, we set the draft board, and then how it plays out. Obviously, you never know how the draft's going to play out, but, we go through different scenarios. But we got to make sure, and we do make sure, is when we're drafting a guy, we got to make sure we have a role for that guy. Like, if we take this guy, how are we going to use them? And all those conversations are taking place, before the draft happens.
What's the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part of my job, that's a great question. I think there's a lot that goes into it on a daily basis. You get pulled in different directions. But I do enjoy that part of it, to be completely honest. You have an opportunity to connect with every player on your team. You're not just the offensive coordinator anymore. You're the head coach that has to connect with the offensive players, the defensive players, the special teams guys around the building, being in that leadership role on a daily basis. So I do enjoy that.
A lot of people in leadership will say they only like surprises on their birthday and Christmas. That there are always surprises and little fires you've got to put out.
Mm-hmm.
What was the biggest challenge, surprise-wise, for you in the last 2 years?
That's a good question. Obviously, last year didn't go as planned. Going 8-9. Was it the end of the world? No, it wasn't end of the world. But obviously, we want to be better. We want to be in the playoffs. But I think just dealing with some of those losses, you go through some stretches where you might lose 3 in a row, but it's keeping that team tight-knit through those times is big, and your messaging's big. You know what I mean? I think that was the biggest challenge is, having some tough losses and getting through those things. But I love the way our guys continue to fight, every week.
And speaking of messaging, and I do apologize, Shane, honestly, for consistently going to this, but it is the thing that fans want to know about, and that's the quarterback position and Anthony Richardson. The messaging over the course of the season and the benching him, the tap out, if we want to go to that. Did you as a coach, when you look back on it now, did you handle it properly from beginning to end of that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think looking back at that thing, obviously me and Anthony had conversations. Obviously the tap out issue was what it was. I think that was a time and a place where he just needed to take a step back and see it from a different perspective. And like I said, I never said we ever lost faith in him, in that situation. So I think after that benching happened, I think he came back. He showed, some really good signs. Obviously the Jets game, he played really good. New England game, he played really good. And it would have been great to see him play the rest of the year. And obviously, he had the back spasms, to end the year. But I wanted to make sure that me and him, like through that process, that we always connect and we're, committed to each other and having those conversations weekly. Me and him, meet weekly, 3 days a week, on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays, one-on-one, going through the game plan, talking football and really talking life and cultivating that relationship on a daily basis.
Is the back a concern?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, because that's good. Because when he, at one point he said he's dealt with it for a while, and in this town, when you start you start talking quarterback and injury, like people have PTSD, right? So you can understand why people would have that hesitation, right?
Yeah, no, I think obviously that was just something that happened, but he's feeling good now.
Offensively speaking, when you look at your offense, you're an offensive mind, you're an offensive guru. The area that, let's say, not quarterback related, that is the link that is the final piece that you feel like is kind of missing for you guys would be what?
Well, I think when you're looking at an offensive team in general, you're looking at offense, you always want to build it inside out. You know what I mean? I think it starts up front with the offensive line, making sure you guys got the guys up front that you need to go be successful. Whether you need to run it or throw it in that situation is critical, because if you can't block anybody, it doesn't really matter. But, we continue to look. I really like our wideout group. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor's really good. The tight end group's a good group. So any piece that we can add to make our football team better.
Can Taylor be used in even more ways?
I don't know. He's pretty good. But we always look into that stuff. I mean, obviously, from a schematic standpoint, when we're playing teams, certain matchups, certain run schemes, he does a lot of things really well running the football. I think he's had his third 1,000-yard season this past year. So he's continued to be a great player for us, but we always look into that stuff.
Shane Steichen's the head coach of the Colts. We're here at the Combine at the Indiana Convention Center. Shane, the reality is the NFL at times can be a copycat league, right? I covered the greatest show on turf, the Rams, when they had wideouts and speed all over the place and Kurt Warner. And now all of a sudden then everybody was trying to do that and it's hard to replicate a Marshall Faulk.
Yeah.
Is there in fact a copycat that goes which is more dangerous? Trying to copycat what's winning or being so held to your own principles and stubborn about it that you don't make adjustment?
No, I think you need to adapt, without a doubt. I think that's the biggest thing is adaptability in this league. And I think, obviously, you have to play to the strengths of your players first and foremost. What do they do well? And then when you talk about copycat league, it is one of those things where you're playing opponents and you're going through a 5-game breakdown and you're watching that opponent and they continue to get hit on this certain run or they have problems with this. And it's like, all right, well, they haven't stopped it yet, so we need to do something like that, but let's dress it up in a different way and not run it the exact same way so it looks a little different.
So when you say what you guys do well, when you look back and you go through game by game, you guys do what well?
I think we run the ball really well. I think we ended up 8th in rushing this year, top 10 there in rushing. I think our offensive line sets the standard for running the football, which is really good.
You do what not well?
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing we need to do better is we need to play complementary football. I don't think we did that very well last year, and I think that's going to be a big point of emphasis. And, it's like, shoot, if the defense gets a turnover, our offense has got to go do something with it. You know what I mean? I think that's a complementary football that makes your teams really good.
You're a parent, correct?
What?
You're a parent, correct? Okay. If you were out of town and you had to pick one player on your roster that you would most trust to be able to come and hold down the fort and watch your kids, who would you pick?
Forrest Buckner.
And the reason I thought you would go there, does that translate into the trust you have in him as a leader in your locker room as well?
Absolutely.
What makes him a leader?
One, I think he sets a standard with his play, and two, he does a great job of holding guys accountable in that locker room. I said this before the other day. I think, the best teams I've ever been around are player-led in that locker room. You know what I mean? And those guys, when the coaches aren't around, it's tight-knit in there, and I think he does a hell of a job with that.
Is there a danger in, especially with younger players, when you're holding them accountable, of holding them too accountable and thus taking away their confidence is maybe the wrong word, but you have to be aware of, like for an Anthony Richardson, when you're trying to teach him lessons, do you have to be aware of how he will respond to that versus shelling up?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think everyone is different, right? How their brains work, how their minds work. So you got to connect with that player. You know what I mean? Especially, you get a guy in the draft or free agency, you got to get that connection, that relationship going first to see what that player's like, because I don't think you can talk to every single player the same way, you know what I mean? Because guys think differently. So I think that's our job as coaches to get to know these guys and connect with these guys so we can talk to them a certain way.
Here's one for you. Give me a question or a point about Anthony Richardson that you prepared for me to ask you that I haven't asked yet.
A question about Anthony Richardson that you haven't asked me yet that I would ask him or you would ask me.
Correct.
I don't know.
Do you feel connected to him?
Absolutely. I think we've had great connection. Obviously, we went through some adversity last year, which I've said, but I think that adversity makes you stronger. You know what I mean? We still have great conversations, obviously with the NFL rules right now, but we still talk on the phone weekly, check in on them, see how things are going down there in Florida.
What do you like about this, and maybe you guys haven't gotten a chance to really dive into it, this particular draft class has really riches in what area?
I think O-line, D-line are very strong this year.
And does that mean are there some of them where you look at it and you say, I've got to evaluate, and maybe this is more a Chris Ballard question, but if there's a particular position that you feel there's a guy you really like, does the necessity to take a player at a position get based upon how much drop-off there is at that position in a later round?
I think that's a fair statement. I really do. I mean, you want to take really good players. You know what I mean? If you think there's a huge drop off from that player X compared to player B, I think there's obviously that conversation that needs to be had.
Is there a particular position at 14 that you're honed in on more than others?
I can't share that with you.
Well, you don't have to say the position, but is there one that you say, I'm going to be honest with you,
I think it depends on how the board plays out.
Right.
I really do. You know what I mean? You're going to have your guys, and, everyone goes through that process of, all right, well, this is what this team needs, and they could go this route. Boom, if this happens, this player is probably going to be there.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think that kind of all plays itself out, obviously through the first round. I think once you get late in the first round, it could go, who knows, you know what I mean? But obviously second and third, that's where guys are just going to start going off the board.
Here's the thing, I can tell you this. Whatever does happen, I can tell you right now, the board's going to fall exactly as I thought it was, right? That's what they always say. Isn't that's like the number one talking point every year. Well, the board went exactly. It's pretty much how we thought it was going to happen, right?
Well, last year all those quarterbacks flew off the board. You know what I mean? That was wild to see that play. And obviously we got Latu, first defensive player, off the board, at our pick.
Did you like, Latu to me, and I know everybody talked about his bend. That was a buzzword.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
At the times that you could see it, you could certainly see it. Did he unleash with the consistency that you hoped?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, I think it's hard anytime a pass rusher comes in this league to have double-digit sacks. You know what I mean? I think it's very rare. I have to go back and look at the numbers. But when we watched Latu and I studied Latu and looking at all his pressures, he had the relentless motor that you want out of a guy. He just never gave up. Even if he was right to the quarterback got it, he would turn and burst and go get it, and that's what we loved about him, and I think he's going to have a hell of a future.
When I last talked to you, it was at training camp or when we last had you on the show, and you were super excited. Like your eyes got kind of big when we were talking about A.D. Mitchell, okay? And I know that you saw a lot throughout that process to that point. Why did it not translate consistently?
That's a great question. I think every year or, every person's process and growth and development's different, and it might take some time, you know what I mean? And he still has all that talent level, you know what I mean? So I'm really looking forward to him to take, the jump into year 2 and year 3. I mean, you saw it with, Alec Pierce last year, going into year 3. He made a huge jump. So we're hoping, that AD can make that jump from year 1 to year 2.
When you think in your mind of, let's just say hypothetically that Richardson takes the step, okay, and the consistency's there. And everybody says Josh Allen. I mean, that'd be wonderful, right? You'd probably be doing backflips. You got Josh Allen. But what receiver most benefits in terms of the quarterback that you envision him to be? It most benefits who?
I think it benefits all these guys. I can't pinpoint one guy. We had 3 guys over 800 yards, and I feel really good about our receivers. I mean, Pittman's been doing it at a high level for us, the last couple of years, and Alex made a huge jump, and Downs is continuing to make plays, and then to have A.D. Mitchell come on, I think all these guys are going to benefit, and all their the level is going to raise with all those guys.
Pittman to me, when you look, especially I think now that we look back on it and know that he was maybe not 100%, you had to be impressed by just the overall. Warrior's overused, Shane, but you get what I'm saying there, right?
He's a warrior. I mean, the guy is as tough as nails. A guy that showed up, every week for his guys and played and practiced. I mean, it was phenomenal. And to have guys like that on your team speaks volumes.
Chris Ballard admitted that at night sometimes it's hard to shut the brain off. For Shane Steichen, and I always call you the mad scientist. You're like I just imagine like all these formulas offensively running through your head. It's 3:30 in the morning. Shane Steichen's laying there, and you can't shut the brain off. It's because what, as it relates to the Indianapolis Colts, is going through it.
How can we get to the playoffs and win a championship? That's what I think about that. And obviously throughout the season, your brain's going on how do we win this football game? What can we do this week to win this football game?
Is there a danger, and your job is to obsess over it, but is there also a danger in that?
I don't think so. I think you got to be obsessed with your craft. If you're not obsessed with your craft, I think that's when you can majorly fail.
And what percent of your roster do you feel is obsessed in their craft?
I think a good chunk of them are. Like, I don't have a percentage for you, but yeah.
But you can tell if a guy's not, right?
Yeah, you can tell.
And so that's one of the things that you've got to work on. And now, Anthony Richardson, is he obsessed with his craft?
He loves football. He works at it. He grinds at it. And obviously it's going to be a big year for him going into year 3.
Going to be a big year for Shane Steichen, year 3 as well. Appreciate the time as always.
Awesome.
I know it's a busy time here at the Combine for you, but always good talking to you. We'll certainly see you in between now and when the season gets underway. All right?
Awesome. Appreciate you.
All right, Shane Steichen, the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back and reassess all of that with Shane Steichen here from the Combine Query & Company on a Wednesday on The Fan. Combine. Thank you to Shane Steichen. By the way, and I should have mentioned this to him, James Boyd has a column up where the NFL Players Association each year does a survey with players, basically almost a, how happy are you at work survey, for lack of a better phrase. The Colts overall were 19th out of the 32 teams in terms of what their overall, and they're asked a number of different questions like, what are the facilities like? What kind of flights do you take? How's the food, etc. I'm going to read for you where the Colts ranked in the ranking breakdown. Treatment of families. The Colts got a B-. That ranks 16th. The Cincinnati Bengals, by the way, I believe got an F in that regard. The food and dining area, the Colts got a C, 25th in the league. Nutritionist and dietitian, the Colts get a B+, that's 18th. Locker room, the Colts got a B, that's 14th. Training room, Colts got a B, that's 13th. Training staff, they got a B, that's 15th. Weight room, B-, 23rd in the league. That was an area of a major selling point for the Colts back years ago. They completely redid their weight room, and I remember Chad Bratsky saying that was the exact reason. Strength coaches, the Colts get an A-, that's 14th. The team travel, the Colts got a D+, that is 27th. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know how. I mean, they take a bus to a chartered flight, and they, I don't know how that would be different from one team to the next, but the Colts nonetheless a D+. Ownership, the Colts got a B, that is ranked as 20th. And lastly, the head coach, Shane Steichen, who you just heard from, got an A. That is 11th. I guess there must have been some A+ in the group, but he does get an A from the NFL Players Association in talking about the way players feel about the head coach of the Colts. I thought Steichen, listen, he is very polished at obviously answering things without answering things. But you can tell a little bit. It's interesting because, in talking to him just before we went on, and he came over about 2 minutes before we went on the air, and just in talking to him and kind of just assessing and reading through, just his body language in general, right? And I was asking him about Anthony Richardson, and he didn't tip the hand too much, but I know that he said, the confidence is right there. He loves football, Richardson, the messaging. I think messaging was an important thing. I noticed he said that a couple of times. And if there's one area where Shane Steichen probably wishes he could have some things back, it is in messaging. Because I think that the Richardson situation, the inconsistency with which, and when I asked him, did you, from one year to the next, what are areas where you need to improve? And I think, he said messaging. And that kind of took to my next question, which was, or answered the question I was going to ask next, which was, I think if there's an area that you could critique for Shane Steichen in the last year, it was, and I remember saying it in the moments on several occasions, that I think he could have benefited from some media training. And I don't mean media training in terms of how to work in the media, but rather just how to, at the podium at times, saying messages that may not have been completely on board with the overall message. For example, and I probably should have asked about this, but Chris Ballard has said, they got a long way to go. And Shane Steichen has said, we're pretty close. I get it. As the coach, I would say the same thing. But does it send the wrong message? And, when I asked about what player he would most trust around his family, and he says DeForest Buckner, I think the reason I ask that is because I think that translates into getting an idea as to who he most trusts in his locker room. And there's no surprise it's Buckner. But Buckner is one of the guys that kind of, truthfully, called out Anthony Richardson, if you want to know the truth. When Richardson was showing immaturity, it was DeForest Buckner that was the one that was like, look, we can't have this. You are the guy that we are all needing to see something from. And So it did not surprise me that he went with Buckner on that answer. Speaking of needing to see some, Indiana's going to need to see a little bit more tonight as they host Penn State at Assembly Hall. For the Hoosiers, if you look at the finality of their season, you've got obviously Penn State, Ohio State at home, and then you've got the Pacific Northwest two-step of Oregon and Washington. Oregon gives them an opportunity for a quality. Indiana's in need right now because they're on the bubble. They're on the outside of the bubble, but they are in need of quality wins for certain, as many as they can get, and especially right now. The Big Ten tournament will provide opportunity, obviously, but if you look realistically at where they are to this point, they should be able. One would assume, at the very least, that Indiana would finish 3-1, maybe 4-0, because if you look at Oregon is the wild card there. Washington is a certainly very winnable game. The only problem there is the travel. Now, Eddie, you've been to Seattle, correct?
Oh, yes. I am going there again in 7 weeks.
Really?
Yes.
Now, I've told you Seattle's my favorite city in the country. And when you went there, I remember telling you that Seattle was my favorite city in the country. It would appear as though Seattle is becoming yours as well.
I haven't traveled to enough cities to say that just yet, but it is up there as of right now.
Now, here's the thing. When you go, you're going for how long?
Just 2 days.
Because, and you're interesting because, you're younger than I, for example, but when you go for just 2 days over there and back, do you feel the time difference, if you will? I mean, can you know what I mean? Like, do you feel it, basically?
Well, we're going there for 2 days, and I think we're going to Vegas for 3, so.
Okay. But when you get there, is your body clock a little off?
The first, not really, because I'm a night guy. I'm a night owl as it is, so, like, if I stay up until 1 or 2 in the morning here, that's, 11 p.m.?
Correct. I get it, yeah. Yeah.
West Coast?
Usually it takes it. That makes sense. I do think that and I'd have to look, and Eddie, maybe you can look it up for me. Do they go Oregon and then Washington or Washington and then Oregon?
I'll look it up.
I think they go Washington and then Oregon. You would hope it's that way, although I shouldn't say that.
It's Washington then Oregon.
Washington, that's right, if we're in Indiana.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. Washington and
Oregon. The
Oregon.
challenge there, if they're going to Washington first, the challenge is this. Washington is not very good. They are the worst team in the Big Ten. But if Washington is going to be – if Indiana is susceptible at Washington, it would be because of the travel, and I think you feel the travel on the front side more than the back side, to your point, because you kind of can acclimate a little bit. It's a long trip. Now, I realize they're 20, 21, 22-year-old guys, right? But at any rate, let's say hypothetically that they do beat Washington. Then you've got Oregon, and they really need the Penn State game, because if they go 3-1, and now all of a sudden they go into the Big Ten tournament where with a win or two, they're over the 20-win plateau, and they are coming in theoretically on a high note, I think they work their way into tournament conversation. Now, I don't think anybody is expecting them to make some huge tournament run. And don't get me wrong, anything shy of a Final Four, and here's what's interesting. If Indiana is to go back and look at it in 2002, Indiana had Mike Davis as their head coach. Obviously, the situations are totally different in terms of how they were acquired as head coach. Mike Davis makes the tournament in year number 1. They get beat by Kent State. Mike Davis then comes back and ends up going to the Final Four, the national championship game. There's conversation about, they have a rally to welcome the team back, and Mike Davis stands up at that rally and says, I got a call from a few NBA teams, and I'm the head basketball coach at Indiana. And the crowd goes crazy, and everybody's like, Mike Davis, he's here, he's staying here. I think there are a lot of people that look back on that, as much as I have a respect and an admiration for the job that Mike Davis did under extremely difficult circumstances. The reality is I think there are a lot of people that feel, in hindsight, not in the moment, But in hindsight, you can look back and say where Indiana erred was they went with the sentimentality and the panic kind of the moment of getting captivated by they made this great run, and so therefore they need to latch on long-term to Mike Davis. And they gave him the contract that then by the end of it they're wanting to get out of. And I think a lot of people now look at it, and Mike Davis did a beautiful service to Indiana in being the guy that was the bridge between the legend of Bob Knight, the legend of Bob Knight still hangs over, right? I mean, you're still trying to get out from underneath that. But nobody wanted to immediately follow Knight. And so maybe you needed Davis to, in fact, go that length of the time. But I think there are those that would say that Indiana should have said, it was great, Mike, we appreciate it. You did a wonderful service to us. You left us in a great spot. We got good recruits coming in. Now we're going to go out and we're going to get John Calipari. We're going to get Rick Pitino, whatever it might have been then. And so I don't think that there's anything, because people have asked me, ludicrous as it sounds, if Indiana was to make some incredible run here and all of a sudden it all comes together and, Umar Ballo catches fire and becomes like Khalil Ware was towards the end of last year, even though, it didn't help Indiana, but is suddenly playing great basketball, Andre Patterson at the end of his career, and Indiana catches fire and makes a run here, is there a way that they stick with Mike Woodson? And I think the answer to that is no. But in terms of how they finish and want to finish strong, starts tonight if they can get it against Penn State at home. Indiana, in terms of the Pacers standpoint, home tonight, Raptors. We'll talk about all of that tomorrow and continue talking about what happens at the Combine when we are back in studio. Eddie, I know, looks forward to seeing me. I will go easy on the cologne tomorrow, Eddie, I promise.
Thank you.
John's up next. He will bring you home until 6 o'clock, and we thank you for listening today to Query & Company on The Fan.